Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Jay Sticky.
And let's just get right into the Less Wrong posts.
May as well.
Okay. First post this week is Artificial Addition.
Both of these, the Artificial Addition and Truly Part of You that we're talking about, I think was the first time I heard of the sheep counter concept.
He wrote a short fic about it. Was
yeah,
this before or
it
after?
might have. I think it was before. I don't know. I think I saw the fic first, actually. The idea of the sheep counter was one of the things from Less Wrong that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And, these are the sequences that talk about it.
He starts with saying, imagine that human beings had evolved, rather than having learned, the ability to count sheep and add sheep. People using this built-in ability have no idea how it worked, the way Aristotle had no idea how his visual cortex supported his ability to see things. Which, first of all, is kind of a weird thing to try to imagine, but...
Like, I just took it as like, okay, imagine this impossible thing and move on.
Okay.
Some people can do math in their head.
I know, I mean, I can do some simple math in my head, but it's different than like...
But I know what I'm doing.
If I glance at that shelf over there, I have no idea how many books are on that shelf.
There's someone in the world that could glance at that out of the corner of their eye and count the number of books, but, like, those are rare.
But A, I can't imagine that. And B, when I do addition, I know what I'm doing. Like, it doesn't just come to me. Right? Like the same way that visual input does for my eyes.
Yeah.
What's fun about these two posts is that, like, you know, the whole sequence's endeavor was, like, let's get people thinking about AI and this whole project. This is, like... It's, I would say, thinly veiled analogy, but it's an explicit analogy. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, look, here's how people are, like, all right, I'm taking off, like, the dancing around it gloves. We're going to just look at the thing.
This is how people think about thinking.
Right.
I'm drawing a direct analogy.
Yeah, and you guys, you know, here's where the failure is happening, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so he says, in this world, because we're going with the direct AI analogy, pocket calculators work by storing a giant lookup table of arithmetical facts? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Arithmetical sounds right. Entered manually by a team of expert artificial arithmeticians for starting values that range between 0 and 100. While these calculators may be helpful in a pragmatic sense, many philosophers argue that they're only simulating addition rather than really adding.
That's where I start laughing.
Right.
Because now you know where the post is going.
Yes. But that would be right? That they're only simulating addition? Like if someone said, what is 3 plus 4, it would look up its lookup table?
Well, I started laughing because it's obviously like an article that's flipped at this point. Like, oh, what if, math was something, that like humans just did naturally, and then we were trying to make calculate, like, because we live in a world where we don't, and where it's super easy to make computers run on math and calculate math. So... it is just the whole idea of, well, if, GPT-3 is coherent, it's only, like, simulating being able to have a coherent thought.
Yeah.
And to me, that just sort of, like, already sort of showed some hypocrisy about the way we think about these things. Mm-hmm. Because what's the difference between, like, simulating being sentient and being sentient?
I think this post and the next one gets into that.
Yeah.
In this world, no one has ever developed an artificial general arithmetician.
AGA.
Yes. Although there are, of course, plenty of domain-specific narrow artificial arithmeticians that work on numbers between 20 and 30, and so on. And if you look at how slow progress has been on numbers in the range of 200, then it becomes clear that we're not going to get artificial general arithmetic anytime soon. The artificial arithmetic devices functioned as a tape recorder, playing back knowledge generated from outside the system, using a process they couldn't capture internally. A human could tell the AA device that 21 plus 16 equals 37, and the AA devices could record the sentence and play it back, or even pattern match 21 plus 16 to output 37, but they couldn't generate such knowledge for themselves.
And it goes on in that vein, talking about basically like flipping a bunch of scripts about the way people talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, a lot of quotes along the lines of this isn't truly artificial intelligence. If you swap out the 13 for the 14, it's completely confused.
You'd have to simulate the whole human brain in order to get it to really do math.
Yeah, we won't have a
neuron by neuron.
Yeah, we won't have a real artificial general addition thing until we can upload a human brain and then have it do the addition for us.
It's emergent.
We have to build it from the bottom up.
Yeah, we have to evolve the computer.
We have to get one that can scan the entire internet for all the different things people say about math facts.
Yeah. And
My favorite example was, haven't you heard of John Searle's Chinese calculator experiment? Even if you had a huge set of rules that would let you add 21 and 16, just imagine translating all the words into Chinese, and you can see that there's no genuine addition going on.
And Eliezer said that this shows the danger of dancing around confusing gaps in your knowledge. When you say it's emergent, or when you say it's unknowable, in neither case are you acknowledging that there is a basic insight required which is possessible, but unpossessed by you. And referencing those comments we were just talking about, none are aimed at setting out on a quest for the missing insight which would make numbers no longer mysterious, to make 27 more than a black box. None of the commenters realized that the difficulties arose from ignorance or confusion of their own minds rather than inherent properties of arithmetic.
I liked the example of, you won't know the artificial arithmetic problem is unsolvable without its key. Like shooting blindfolded at a distant target, you can fire blind shot after blind shot, crying, "You can't prove to me that I won't hit the center!" But until you take off the blindfold, you're not even in the aiming game. You don't have enough information to strike at a small target in a vast answer space. Until you know it won't. Until you know your ideal will work, it won't. Mm-hmm. I thought that was that'd make a good T-shirt. I mean, there's some. I get the point he's making and the moral he's drawing from that, but like someone could argue, it's like, look, you can have a half-baked plan that works out, right?
No.
But that's not, I think, an actual counter-argument. That's like saying, no, it just
being
worked.
Not in the aiming game. Like, maybe you can get lucky, but...
Yeah, the half of your plan you didn't have planned out just happened to work in your favor, right?
Maybe you have to take a lot of blind shots before you start to realize that there's a blindfold. That's the real problem.
That'd make another good T-shirt, or at least comment on,
Adds to the analogy well.
It really does. No one, torturing that analogy is like aware that they're doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you take enough shots and you're like, okay, I'm missing something, right?
Right.
Why am I not hitting this?
Yeah.
When the basic problem is your ignorance, clever strategies for bypassing your ignorance lead to shooting yourself in the foot.
Perhaps literally.
The sequences are so quotable. I'm surprised they don't have like a cafe press, so I could get that on a mug.
I mean, you can be the change you want to see in the world.
I don't have ownership of the sequences.
I think they're online for,
I guess,
public consumption.
I mean, I could make my own mug. I wouldn't want to make an Etsy shop or a cafe press, or does cafe press even still exist?
I'm not sure, but I meant like you order a mug and you put this, like order a custom mug and put this on there. I think selling these, you might be in, murky territory.
Yeah.
I bet if we did it on the Bayesian Conspiracy merch shop and then just kick back 10-15% to Eliezer for anything we sold, he'd be cool with it.
Probably.
I'm going to do it.
Go for it. I think we sold 5 things
Right.
from our current thing. We might sell an additional 3 if we did it this way, and Eliezer could enjoy the entire nickel that he gets from the 15% of the small fraction that we get out of it.
Yeah.
But then it would be available to people.
I really like the map graphic design that they had on the printed books, and that's now on the Less Wrong website. I'd really like to have a mug that has that on it, actually. Anyway.
Alrighty. So that was
a sequence.
Yes, artificial addition. The second one.
I don't know if we want to spend another minute doing this. You can just say,
go
no,
for it.
let's move on. I was thinking about that last line when I was reading it yesterday. When the basic problem is your ignorance, clever strategies for bypassing your ignorance lead to shooting yourself in the foot. Mm-hmm. I feel like you can have clever strategies to circumvent your own gaps of knowledge, depending on how small of a scope your problem is.
Did he say can or can't?
I think you can.
You can bypass your ignorance.
And you can do so successfully, reliably, with good techniques, but maybe not on important big problems.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what your goal is. If there's a problem in your way and I don't know, if you're just trying to figure out how to forge a really good sword and you don't understand the chemistry, but you know that if I use these rules, then it will be brittle, versus if I use these ones, it'll be strong, then you can just sort of pass that knowledge down. But if you're just trying to make a good enough sword, maybe it's the best sword in your village, then you just do that. If you want to make the best sword that you could with materials nearby, you'd have to learn chemistry.
Yeah, since we had the
physics
Roots of Progress episode just a few weeks ago, which was fucking great. I think that's kind of a great analogy where before knowledge of modern chemistry, there wasn't, and metallurgy, they weren't even in the aiming game. They were just taking wild shots, and every now and then one would get them a better sword, and they're like, oh, okay, gonna keep doing this. and pass on that knowledge to a select few within their cabal, because you don't want competitors to learn this. But
Maybe I should have said like bow and arrow or something, if we're going to keep using the aiming metaphor.
yeah, but just randomly stumbling into things and then keeping those and just doing a lot of crazy experimentation is very different from like actually aiming at the thing you want, because you know how it works and how the parts interact.
I wonder if we can. I'll introduce another analogy and see if this is.
Pile them on, more analogies. We love them.
I watch all of the Great British Baking Show, and it would be surprising, except it's not, the number of people that are like engineers or chemical engineers that are on the show. Because it turns out when
cooking is simple chemistry.
it is, but then you get a lot of people who are just hobby cooks who are also really, really good, but don't know the first thing about the chemistry of what they're doing, right? And so they're getting really far and really good through I guess
Trial and error-ish.
they have, I guess maybe it's two different ways of hitting the target. One is about knowing the chemistry, and one's about trial and error, and just like having the ability to infer from like the last 10 times I did something kind of like this, it worked out like this, so it'll work this time doing this new thing.
There's also lots of knowledge about cooking.
I was going to say, you got hundreds of generations of trial and error.
Just be standing on the shoulders of giant cake bakers or whatever.
Yeah. But I guess
I just started laughing when you said the Great British Baking Show, because I've just been like rewatching Bob's Burgers, and there was one where they were watching that, and the like littlest kid Louise is like, I can't believe that's how they picked the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think in that case there are different ways to hit the target, right? And one is through being a good cook, one is through understanding the nature of what it is that you're actually doing, like at the chemical level. And both could get you there, right?
The first one seems a lot like evolution, just random trial and error, and as we all know, evolution is very slow and doesn't always get you the results you want.
It doesn't have to be random trial and error, though. You can kind of know what you're aiming for.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, is that, I don't enhance my cake recipe by just like grabbing any random thing from the kitchen and throwing it into the batter, right? I'll be like, no, let's add a little more vanilla, a little less this, like things that I know should be in a cake. At least that narrows down the space considerably.
Well, then in that case, you're never going to invent the jalapeno cake.
Yeah.
Or like you have
thank goodness for that. But
your grandmother's cake recipe, and you just tweak it a little bit each time, or like you realize there's some happy accident, and then you just reproduce that. I mean, that is like a lot of how you got grandma's cake recipe, was that recipes would be passed down through families.
Yeah. And
so there was generations of people tinkering with and perfecting different recipes.
I don't think you would have gotten shepherd's pie if you didn't get the, well, this is what we have left over at the end of the season. Let's all mush it together.
That's creativity. Thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And creativity also is part of it. Just like that creativity is the ability to be able to think of like, it's interesting because it's like, they're both part of the innovative process, but it's almost the inverse of the thing of just knowing all of the facts about the thing versus having a brain that can think outside of that formula where most people can't.
I think I heard creativity defined once as like something that is high in your preference order but low in your search order. Like you wouldn't have thought to look there, but it's the kind of thing that you would have wanted to find, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that sounds like a original Yudkowskyism, or at least one that I heard from him somewhere, but that stuck with me. Anyway, thanks for indulging me on the cooking thing. I don't want to keep us on this particular post too long, but that's what I was thinking of, because the reason I brought this up is because I haven't seen the last episode yet, so I don't know who is actually going to be the winner of this season. But when in semifinals, they sent home the guy who like started off at 95 out of 100 and maybe got to like 96 out of 100 over the last 7 weeks. Whereas other people started at like 60 and they got to like 95, right? So it's a much bigger jump, but it almost disadvantages this guy for being so kick-ass the whole time that he just had less room to grow.
So do they rate you based on how much you grow in a season?
They don't divulge their criteria.
You do learn best from mistakes.
But yeah, so there's some of that. They like to see people, who get better at things that they used to not be good at or something.
Okay.
But I feel like if you're perfect at everything, that shouldn't be a punishment.
Right.
But they don't have like an express criteria. That said, you also don't like win. You win like a plate that says you won the Great British Baking Show. If it was like $1 million, then I'd want to know what criteria are you judging me that I didn't earn the $1 million. But it's just for fun, so I can dig it.
Okay.
Anyway, the guy that went home was an engineer who he's great. Watch this show, everybody. It's wholesome and fun.
I was just thinking about, before we end that, because we were just talking about mother of learning, and I think that that's a really good example to that whole series about. For people that don't know it, it's Ratfic, where there's a fantasy world where there's a kid who's in a time loop, and then there's some problems he has to solve by looping the same month over and over again and learning magic. And that like really demonstrates that in order to become a master, you need both the book learning and the real world experience. The like, trying stuff in real life, making mistakes, learning from them, learning from other people that have been there.
I do think there's some things that you can't.
I don't know how that would translate to AI. Yeah, because
also like if you want to create a nuclear reactor, there's no amount of random experimentation over generations of people that will get you. You might discover like radioactivity and be able to
Marie Curie.
Yeah,
and subsequently death by radioactivity or radiation poisoning.
Yeah. But actually creating a nuclear reactor, I think, requires a level of knowledge of the gears that you would have to take off the blindfold to get.
But you needed Marie Curie to die of radiation poisoning by tinkering around and figuring out what radioactivity is.
Yeah.
So I think, you still needed both there. I'm just thinking, I don't know what that would look like in AI, and it's kind of terrifying if you think about what it would look like. I mean, people...
maybe the GPT-3s are like the Marie Curies.
Yeah, GPT is, being watched by a lot of people, too, but I'm thinking of the even, weirder AIs that grad students are making, and I get a bunch of Japanese ones for art. Mm-hmm. There's so many people making AIs to make anime waifus. Mm.
Are there actually more than one?
Oh my god, there's so many.
Okay, I figured once you had this waifu does not exist, how many more do you really need?
All of them. But
okay.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna, have a bunch of grad students tinkering with AIs up until one of them becomes sentient, if one hasn't already. And that's a little terrifying. But I, for one, welcome our anime waifu overlords. Just for the record.
Yes.
There are worse ways to go.
Never thought I'd end this way. But I always kind of hoped. All right. Truly Part of You is our next episode. Not episode. Is our next
sequence.
Less Wrong post. Yes, sequence post. It starts out with, suppose a physicist tells you that light is waves, and you believe the physicist. Also, I'm skipping a little bit, suppose that instead the physicist told you light is made of tiny, curvy things. Would you notice any difference of anticipated experience? How can you realize that you shouldn't trust your seeming knowledge that light is waves? One test you could apply is asking, could I regenerate this knowledge if it were somehow deleted from my mind?
Notice that when I hear a physicist tells you light is waves, I've had this, idea in my head, heard it so many times, had it, explained by what it's interacting with, that my mental image is of a wave, a sine wave, and, maybe it's colored yellow and there's a bunch of little ones but then when I saw light's made of little curvy things, I realized that my brain generates an image of a slinky, a spiral. So already, I only know that it's sine waves, and I'm picturing one mentally because that was probably a illustration I saw in a textbook or a 3D model in a YouTube video. That's not representative of what light is either, but I know that one's more correct than the other. So
light isn't a slinky.
But yeah, that kind of helped me generate what maybe it would be like to be someone that's just heard light as waves for the first time, and you don't know what that means yet, and how you can have a sort of right idea or mental model, but totally wrong in a way that might matter if you were doing, double slit experiments or something.
One of the ways that I kind of approach is, because this is the example brought up a lot through the sequences, is light being waves, whatever that means.
It's a particle and a wave.
Right. So of course, yeah. So for me, I couldn't recreate that knowledge. I wouldn't even know what it would mean to get started looking at that project. And so I kind of put basically almost all of the things I quote unquote know into the category of trivia. Okay. If this was on Jeopardy,
you could answer
light is made of what are waves, right?
Teacher questions.
Right. But I'm kind of fine with that, for that being most of my knowledge.
Because you're never going to use the knowledge about light maybe being waves or whatever in your life.
Yeah, like for some reason I have in my head that the Battle of Hastings was in 1066,
Well,
right? I don't know who fought in that war.
It was the French and the English.
Well,
I think
so
the
you know more than
reason-
I do. But the thing is, how could I
Well,
possibly go
loose
about?
definitions of
How could I possibly go about verifying that for myself? Right?
Yeah.
I couldn't.
to find some source documents.
I guess I could find source documents, but does that count as someone else putting it in my head again? Like that sounds like just finding a physics book that tells me, light is waves.
Well,
again.
you have to put stuff in your head by interacting with the real world. So I think like
But that world's gone. It's 1,000 years ago, right?
I feel so many historians cringing right now that I use the terms English and French.
Well, in any case, it's one of those things that like they can cringe more because I'm saying like that's not the same kind of knowledge that Eliezer's putting in a special privileged box of like things that you can understand and discover on your own, right?
I think it is. Because if you were, like he says, if you were to erase the knowledge of the Battle of Hastings from your brain completely, could you recreate it on your own?
theoretically you could, but only if you were looking for it. Which
Right.
I think that's why like when Stephen you said most of my knowledge is this kind of like trivia, and I think it's fine to be comfortable with that if you live in a society that has historians and like the field of science and the scientific method, because
And
like
the internet, so you can look up the trivia that you need when you need it.
like that's why if I didn't know anything about physics and I heard like light is waves, I would know whether to trust that that's true or not.
You would know?
Well, like if it was a physicist who I knew was an actual researcher who was familiar with the scientific method,
Yeah,
then
but
like
you wouldn't know whether to trust the knowledge. You would know whether to trust the person.
yeah, I would trust the source.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. Like where if you imagine like being a hunter-gatherer tribe and someone says, "Oh, rain is caused when the gods are crying," you would be like, "I have no idea whether that's true," or like you can't verify any of your knowledge or very little of it. Like if someone told you you make fire by hitting flint together,
I remember in high
then
school.
you could test that, but you can't test whether the gods are crying.
Yeah. In high school, in AP Physics, our physics teacher walked us through re-deriving that E equals MC squared. And it took basically an entire semester. But when we got there at the end, and I was writing down the equation, I was like... I was like 2 steps before the last line. I was like, oh, holy shit. I know where this is going. We just proved it. Oh my god, this is awesome.
I feel like I did the same thing just as a nerd, like looking shit up in, what became, I was like Wikipedia, no, encyclopedias, the book ones, what Wikipedia used to be. And then, yeah, I remember that same moment of like Einstein must have been like fucking running through the streets naked, like,
Yeah.
when he figured that out. Because yeah, I remember like being really obsessed with that equation and writing it on like. Remember when you used to have to like cover books in school
yeah.
with like brown paper bags? Yeah,
But, like, could I re-derive it now? I mean...
I couldn't if I didn't have the foreknowledge, of giants.
Yeah. If I knew
Guiding
there
me
was an
along the way.
equation like that, I suppose I could start doing a lot of experiments and trying to find it again. And it would probably take me more than one semester if I wasn't being guided. But eventually, I think so, because it falls out of the equations and the observations if you, give it enough time and make enough of them. But
I think with Stephen in the Battle of Hastings and you with E equals MC squared, like, you could regenerate that knowledge, but only if Stephen was a historian that was, like, specifically,
right, that's what you were dedicating yourself
narrowing the domain there. And if you were basically Einstein, like, if it were just me, I would never figure out either of those things.
Well, the fact that
first
knowing
principles.
that the fact that knowing that it's possible is a big deal. Like, if you also erased from my mind and erased from society the knowledge that this is out there to find, that would take an Einstein level of intellect to figure out. But if someone just, like, erases the actual, the equation, but there's still the idea that I think energy and matter are related in some way that can be quantified,
And you're curious enough to do a bunch of experiments and
Yeah.
learn lots of math.
then it's a lot easier. Just knowing that it's possible is a huge first step.
Yeah, I think you guys make good points, and I was thinking about what I said about history not falling into like the domain of achievable knowledge, like in this special category, and I realized I think I was wrong there, because you can't like conduct an experiment the same way you can, I don't know, with, this isn't E equals MC squared, but whatever, light bending around an eclipse or something, right? Mm-hmm. But you can say, well, I anticipate I will find something like this in this field if I go dig, right? And that is an actual experiment.
Like, if you found ruins on a different planet somewhere, you would have the idea that you could figure out where they came from, how they got here. Whereas if you're a medieval peasant, you've been scratching at the dirt your whole life, and you see the ruins of the aqueducts, you're like, I don't know, man. Giants before were able to move stones like that? Who fucking knows?
Yeah.
You don't even have the idea that there was something there to research in some way. I mean, obviously there's something there to research, but that there's some way of going about it.
I want to cut in a clip of a Rasputina song, which we don't have to do. But there's a song that's sung, I think, from the perspective of a American colonial little girl saying that we discovered the remains of giants from the Bible, and it's this very happy jig song, but the joke being that people found dinosaur skeletons.
Cool.
But because they only had a biblical education, they were the Bible talks about leviathans and behemoths. This must be proof.
Mm-hmm. Good old Bible. We got a little off track. Shall we jump back into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for indulging my, I think because that's the premise of this whole thing. Can you regenerate this knowledge, that if it's deleted from your mind? I wanted to kind of hammer on that for a minute. So now I'm prepared to keep going.
Okay.
All right.
If you see a beaver chewing a log, then you know what this thing that chews through logs looks like, and you will be able to recognize it on future occasions, whether it's called a beaver or not. But if you acquire your beliefs about beavers by someone else telling you facts about beavers, you may not be able to recognize a beaver when you see one.
That cracks me up because I had a friend from New York City who I picked up, and she was coming to visit me, and there's these things called muskrats. I mean, New Jersey has beavers and muskrats, but muskrats, they're large aquatic rats. And there were a few of them just hanging out by the roadside, and my friend was like, "Oh my god, beavers! I can't believe there's real beavers, wow!" And I just didn't have the heart to tell her those are muskrats.
It's just a big rat.
Yeah, look at the beavers. That's cool, right?
That's I don't know. You should have said something, because
I think I did.
Okay,
but
there's a flawed idea of what beavers are, and that could become very embarrassing someday. But yeah, this point about the beavers thing and about regenerating knowledge is that if you don't have enough experience to regenerate beliefs when they are deleted, then do you have enough experience to connect that belief to anything at all? He quotes Wittgenstein saying, "A wheel that can be turned though nothing else moves with it is not part of the mechanism." And I guess that's what you said about trivia. It doesn't really connect to anything. It doesn't matter at all. So it's trivia. It's not a part of you.
Yeah, and so I guess what I'm getting at is that the only thing I'd take away, from my digression there, is that I'm okay with having plenty of my repository of facts be of that category, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's I don't care. This knowledge is not part of me, right? This is something that I believe, that I would bet on if someone asked me, right? But I'm not. It's not the kind of thing I care enough about to try to integrate,
I've picked up a few things about stacks and stack traces just from talking to you and being around you and Brian when you guys are talking. But if someone needed me to do anything with that knowledge, I'd be like, nope, I don't know, man. This is trivia in my head. I cannot entangle it with anything in the real world to make any sort of predictions or affect changes.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask actually, in the beginning of the Truly Part of You essay, there's this notation with state of mind. Mm-hmm. I forget if we talked about that concept, but I was just curious, as the non-programmer, do you know what this notation is? Does this make sense to you?
He called it Lisp notation, which is an old programming language that I'm not familiar with. Okay. That might be how you would diagram out a function or something, but I'm just guessing. It does not look like the most succinct way to explain that concept to me, but
also sort of is the same idea that those, happiness and state of mind are not truly part of you if you were a computer that just had that statement installed. So there's just a bunch of illustrative examples. The next one was my sheep counter. Mm-hmm. A shepherd builds a counting system that works by throwing a pebble into a bucket whenever a sheep leaves the fold, and taking a pebble out whenever the sheep returns. If you, the apprentice, don't understand this system, if it's magic that works for no apparent reason, then you won't know what to do if you accidentally drop an extra pebble in the bucket. I broke the sheep counter! Mm-hmm. If 2 + 4 = 6 is a brute fact unto you, and then one of the elements changes to 5, how are you to know that 2 + 5 = 7 when you were simply told that 2 + 4 = 6? I guess that kind of, no, I'm glad I jumped back up to the notation. at the top, because that's just saying that, like, if you just have the statement 2 plus 4 equals 6, and you don't know that the TWO equals the integer 2, like, yeah, then, like, you don't have any knowledge about math.
Yeah, if you don't understand what these things are and what they represent.
And then, I really like this. If you see a small plant that drops a seed whenever a bird passes it, it won't occur to you that you can use this plant to partially automate the sheep counter, which I just love the idea of, I'm imagining for some reason, like, this is medieval times, like, or, like, maybe, like, a fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just, like...
Got this awesome biopunk tinkerer.
Yeah,
in
like, I was just
Europe.
imagining, yeah, like, you know, like, thatched roof cottages and, like, twine and springs and wood, like, contraptions that...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, though you learned with this plant that drops seeds, though you learned something that the original maker would use to improve on their invention, you can't go back to the source and recreate it. When you contain the source of a new thought, that thought can change along with you as you acquire new knowledge and new skills. When you contain the source of a thought, it becomes truly a part of you and grows along with you. So it's very, very useful to be able to have those things actually understood and be a part of you rather than be trivia if you need to use those at all. Although I don't think any of us would necessarily run into a situation where it matters to us how light propagates and...
Actually, I took optics for artists, as a class in college. I have an art bachelor's, lol. You need to understand how light works to be a good artist.
Do you need to understand it on the level of it is modeled as a mathematical wave function?
No, but, like, subsurface scattering is something that you need to know in order to draw, like, translucence.
Okay.
And then, like, there's a light source, you know, like light and shadow, and then there's also bounce light. So if you're drawing a portrait of a person, a novice artist would, or, like, I don't know, not a novice, intermediate artist would look at the face and draw the parts that are, you know, like, lit from the light source coming down from the ceiling, say. And then the shadows, okay, I understand that the light's coming from the ceiling, so the underneath of the nose, the chin, etc. are going to be shadowed. And an expert artist would know that the light is also bouncing off the floor, or off the walls, so you have to draw not just the primary light source, but the bounce light, which can also be colored.
Cool.
So, all that is to say that, I don't know, going back to the analogy of the wheel, I liked that one a lot, but it, like, kind of got me thinking, if there's a mechanism where all the wheels are turning different things, and there's just one wheel sitting there spinning, yeah, it's not interacting with any of it. But I was thinking about more, like, thought as a network, where you have all the ideas that are connected to the way light works. Like, you know what a wave and a particle is, and then you can kind of imagine what something in the middle of that might be, and you know about the two-slit experiment, and you know about light bouncing, or prismatics, or whatever. And those all, like, form a model together that interacts with other things like drawing.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you for the most part, but, like, when you said you know what a wave and a particle is, and you can imagine something in between the middle of those, like...
That's actually, like, kind of where my knowledge is fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm worried...
you can't see it, so...
I'm worried about that kind of aspect of things, because if you don't... It's okay to just have trivia, but if you're trying to use trivia that isn't truly a part of you, then you can run into things like Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
Chopra
stuff, where it's like, you know, quantum physics says that you can
relative,
affect
man.
things, at a distance without transferring information, and that means that anything is possible in psychic powers and the secret. Oh my god! And that comes from, like, having absorbed trivia and thinking the words mean the same thing they do in your imagination, and then trying to affect the world with trivia rather than affecting the world with knowledge that is truly part of you.
Deepak Chopra exists in a plane where there is no territory and there's just the map. But what I heard Jay saying about artists just confirmed to me that there were no good artists up until, like, what, 70 years ago?
There were lots of good
Michelangelo was pretty fucking good.
But you were saying that you have to understand that light is made of waves and the...
You don't have to understand that, but you...
I thought you said you did.
I'm saying that, like, the more knowledge you have about light, so, like...
I was just teasing. I meant, like...
No, it's kind of like Michelangelo was just
like,
drawing things and observing the way light worked. I mean, also, he was a bit of a, like, inventor, tinkerer, but,
well, the thing is,
you
like,
can absorb enough of that knowledge, kind of the way that, like, the baker who just is experimenting in the kitchen, like, Michelangelo definitely understood subsurface scattering, but he doesn't understand why it works. just that like when you're drawing translucence, you have to draw it like this.
Totally. That's what I was going to say is, and that's why I was being facetious about it. But one way that you would do that is I would draw the face as I thought I should, and then look at my picture and then look at the face that I'm drawing. I'm like, these don't look like each other. What am I missing? And then you keep going back and realizing like, oh, there's a blue hue on the right cheek because that wall is blue. Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. But you don't have to understand you don't have to understand anything about why that's the case, right? Mm-hmm. Like it sure helps, but like I think you made a great. I think drawing it back to the cooking analogy is perfect because you can be a great baker / chef without having any understanding of chemistry, or you can be a great chemist and still stuck in the kitchen, right?
Get understanding of chemistry, but you get it through your own tinkering. Like you might not know, like why baking soda and vinegar foam, but you know that it does.
I think that's more alchemy than chemistry then.
Yeah.
Chemistry to me implies knowing things about
chemicals,
molecules and how they interact. Yeah.
Well, you do know how that, like, you could get good enough that you know how things interact, and you could anticipate an experience between, like, combining lemon juice and dairy. It's just, I think, like, the top-down versus the bottom-up knowledge. Anyway.
I can dig it. That's awesome.
Strive to make yourself the source of every thought worth thinking.
That sounds hard.
It does.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Some thoughts are worth having, even if you didn't make them up yourself.
If the thought originally came from outside, make sure it comes from inside as well. Continually ask yourself, how would I regenerate the thought if it were deleted?
Oh, I think we just answered that, like the bottom up.
When you have
I guess that would be bottom up knowledge if you're baking or drawing by trial and error.
When you have an answer, imagine that knowledge being deleted as well. And when you find a fountain, see what else it can pour. And I have the same note that Steven is about to make, I think.
I think that I just made in passing. I saw that you put that in here. Like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that is truly admirable. And when you really know this stuff, oh my God, you can do amazing things. You can, like, be the John Carmack of baking or the John Carmack of the physical world or whatever.
Knowledge transfers, too, which is why I was thinking more about the network than, well, at first, like, the clock analogy with the one wheel spinning and then a network where there's a node that nothing's attached to. But, when you start making a big web, it becomes easier to triangulate the missing information if you were to delete it, because there's a lot of things still attached to it. So when it was saying, like, how would I regenerate this if it was deleted? And then imagine that knowledge being deleted, and I'm just imagining you're, like, deleting nodes, so all the connections between them break. But then, like, you could still follow the ones that you still have, and, like, if you knew nothing about history, you'd be wandering around, like, picking up rocks and... like, what the hell is this? But if you knew that you were looking for, like, the Battle of Hastings is a thing that happened that, like, we need to figure out more information about because it was never recorded. And you'd, like, know where to go look and what kinds of, archaeological things to find and how to process them and how to get knowledge from that if you had all the rest of the nodes about history.
Well, and there's all kinds of useful trivia that you can have in your life that you don't need to understand why it's the case. Like if you have a carbon monoxide detector or a radon pump or something, like you just need to know that if this thing starts beeping, I need to get out of the house. Right. I don't need to know what carbon monoxide is or how it interacts with my body to know that I shouldn't be in here.
I think it's better to know, like...
The more you know, the merrier. But as long as you know that bit of trivia, you won't die of carbon monoxide poisoning.
I think the suggestion that everybody should, really strive to actually says that strive to make yourself the source of every thought. Well, maybe worth thinking is
I guess you got to put a lot of things into the not worth thinking then.
Yeah, well, is it worth
thinking?
We don't have infinite time, at least that we know of. It'd be cool if we did, because this is exactly what I would do if I were immortal. Just learn everything, tinker with shit.
Even if you had infinite time, by the time you learned how the carbon monoxide detector works, maybe you've forgotten about why light behaves as a wave.
Hoping if I have infinite time, I also have infinite storage. Or not infinite storage, but like perfect recall.
Okay.
There's like some way to capture thoughts. But anyway, considering that we do have limited time and resources, I think maybe not striving to make yourself the source of every thought. Yeah. But the ones worth thinking,
I think this is a great ideal if you're a Superman, transhuman, mythical, godlike figure, but it's so much fucking work to truly make yourself the source of even a little bit of knowledge.
The fact that he threw in worth thinking, I think, Ineash, you're a writer, Steven, you're a programmer, thoughts about those things are probably more worth thinking. Whatever you're most interested in or what you're, depending on what your goals are, I think that that actually it's pretty worthwhile to try to like really explore the knowledge behind.
If it's like your craft, if
Yeah.
it's your profession, totally. I mean,
That's why people like talking shop. That's why people like
Yeah.
podcasts about what their interests are, because it makes that knowledge more a part of you. You can trace back the source, and you can, really,
Connecting a lot more nodes.
yeah, exactly. You can get a deeper Gears level feeling about these things. But you can't do that for everything.
Yeah, or like if you tried it with everything you run across. I think I actually like when I first got into Less Rog, I sort of like used to be really anxious about this. The fact that like I started noticing that there were all these gaps in my knowledge, and I felt like I need to like just be on Wikipedia constantly. I think I had anxiety about that as a kid too, or just liked encyclopedias. But like it's like, okay, shit, how do bikes work? Like you like go to ride your bike to work, and then like you're like on Wikipedia. After a bit, it's like, oh, like you walk in, oh, how does carpet work? Wait, how does paint work? You get super overwhelmed. You do have to, focus on like what things are worth really drilling down into the nitty gritty, and then like what things can you just sort of like, when I'm an immortal, I'll figure out how paint works.
Well, I think feeling
that one on
anxiety
the back
about
burner.
not knowing everything segues very nicely into our main topic today.
Yeah.
it does so nicely that I can't use or I was going to bring up one more thing related to that, but
No, go ahead.
I guess I would wonder where you stop the terminating process of like, once you figure out where that thought came from, erase that too. Because like, eventually you just, I was thinking about this more in terms of like, ethics. How do you live a good life? How do you maximize your own happiness or whatever your goal is? If you become convinced about like the tenets of utilitarianism or the conclusions, or I guess rather, I can give the analogy of the shallow pond, right? Steven Pinker's thing, or Peter Singer's thing. That's one analogy, but if we'll throw that out. How else would you think about how you weigh like the cost of goods versus human lives? Well, suffering is bad. We'll throw that part out too. Like at that point, it just seems like you're throwing everything away.
I think you just start deleting enough that you would
You start crashing.
anti-age, like you just go down to being a baby eventually, like because
I guess
the idea of the network, and you delete the nodes, and then like the connections between them go away, is actually like neurons are a network like that. So
I guess that ultimately brings,
be going all the way back to blank slate.
and that brings you back to the newly created AI, right? That wouldn't have anything at all in its network yet.
Well,
This is really valuable to think of in the terms of an AI for sure. I think that in terms of us,
The
like
difference with an
I'm
AI,
fine just
though-
like saying, okay, no, I think I did some legwork and I've established these axioms for my moral framework, and yeah, they're up for revision if something else comes up, but for now I'm going to build on this edifice, right? Like the basic things, like suffering is bad, right? And what is suffering? I don't know. The thing that people say that they hate. Why is it wrong to do that? Because I've decided that it is, for the sake of just dodging the rest of this argument about what's right and wrong, right?
Basically, we as humans know everything we know from experimentation, and then other people's experimentation that they've recorded. Like, if you think of erasing, like, basically, like, stuff because your history has taught you it. So if you started just rewinding time, you'd go back to just being a baby which has, like, a bunch of hardware and software ready to go, but nothing installed on it yet. And the difference, I think, like, a human and an AI, they both would start as a baby with, like, the hardware and software, but, like, no knowledge. But with an AI, you can give it, like, the entire internet. You could have it read every book. Like, you can't pre-install a bunch of, or, like, put a bunch of shit in a baby's head. It has to learn things by interacting with the world. An AI would as well, but you could
do it
preload
faster.
it with tons of stuff.
I know Kung Fu.
Yeah. And babies come preloaded with a bunch of things too.
Yeah, it's not exactly true that they're a blank slate, but that's
Yeah,
why I was
yeah.
saying sort of the software and hardware. Like, mostly babies are little, like, learning machines.
Yeah, that's what their job is. I like the running time backwards analogy, because I was just thinking, yeah, that would be like if you knock out one piece of knowledge, but you still have all the supporting network. That's kind of like running time backwards, and you could refill in that piece of knowledge because of the supporting network around it. But if you kept that initial piece of knowledge and knocked out the supporting network around it, then you just have that one unsupported belief, and then it's like that single spinning wheel, or like a piece of trivia where it's
mean,
not that useful anymore. It doesn't.
That reminds me of, like, losing belief. Because like if I thought of like the edifice of my beliefs about religion, and then like the way that it deteriorated was exactly like that. If like pieces of it fell away, and then eventually there were just like spinning wheels left there that like if you scrutinize them, it's like, oh, this isn't connected to anything. Time to throw that one out.
Yeah.
That one out.
Yeah. Well, for next time, we are going to talk about the less wrong posts, not for the sake of happiness alone, and leaky generalizations. Okay.
Thanks for indulging me. We could have torn through these sequence posts, and I feel like I bogged us down.
Yeah.
As long as we had fun.
I think driving.
Usually take us a while anyway. So.
Well, give me a bonk if I'm ever distracting us, or just say, like, look, let's stay on topic, and I won't be offended.
I think you bring up good stuff.
I agree. Your contribution is valuable.
Appreciate it.
So our main topic this week is a post written by Sasha Chapin. Not Chaplin. Chapin. Sasha Chapin. I wonder if he's related to Patrick at all. Who is in the rationalist community and has got a post that he recently wrote called "Your Intelligent, Conscientious In-Group Has Bad Social Norms Too," which we will be talking about today a little bit because we're always trying to make this community good for not just the people who've been here for a long time, but for the new people too. And there's some certain traps that they might fall into and not notice it. And so we're trying to help out with that, right?
Super into it.
Yeah, I'm glad that, actually I was asking earlier where you had found this, and I think you said just, someone posted on the Bayesian Conspiracy Discord.
I believe so.
Because, this is something related to, like, what's been on my mind lately with, the rationalist community and some of the problems that we have as a community.
Okay.
Like, kind of a outreach problem. Sort of like what Charlie and I were talking about, too, how there's, like, skew gender, skew race, you know, like we're a lot of sort of 2030 nerdy white programmers. And then a disproportionate number of trans people. And it, I think, is cool. I found myself when I was reading this wanting to push back against it a few times. I think some of them were valid, and some I realized I was just kind of like actually experiencing the like, hey, this person's criticizing my in-group, how dare they? And I'm like, oh wait, that's the post.
Yeah.
When we go through the post and you find the examples of those, let me know which ones jumped out at you.
Yeah.
As, you know, I'm in this picture and I don't like it.
That wasn't my issue, but I'll...
Okay, I just like that phrasing of stuff. That wasn't what you're describing.
So the post starts out by saying, some rationalists become miserable by trying to govern their entire lives through nothing but rationality. And some EAs, in this case short for effective altruists, which is basically like a sister community, a lot of overlap, but not necessarily the exact same thing. EAs feel bad by holding themselves to an impossible standard of ethics. I also notice this happens in all kinds of other nerdy, purpose-oriented communities. This is a real shame because these are some of the most productive, original, intelligent, charming, strange people in my world. So he's basically saying, like, here's a thing I found that seems to make people miserable, and I'd like to address it.
Yeah, I realized one of the things that I kept pushing back against, or like finding myself annoyed by when I was reading this, was kind of called out in the beginning here, where it was like, it's not just rationality in EA. He was saying other nerdy, purpose-oriented communities also, like, and I was just kind of like, as I was reading it, like, maybe I just missed that part, but I was like, you're describing every social, like, community that, because I've been in other communities, such as, like, the anime, you know, like, convention community, and I was just like, this just happens in anytime humans make a group.
Yes. I think that he kind of explicitly says that, though, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I was just calling out. I was like, oh, he said it in, like, the, you know, second paragraph, but,
I think he drives it home, like, late in the thing, too, where he's like, look, this is probably true of other circles that I used to run in, too, but I'm not in those anymore. I think that there's still value in pointing this out because people might think, you know, all those other groups have all these toxic problems, but mine doesn't. Yeah. And so that's the point, right? Hence the title.
Yeah. I think every group has this issue, and being able to, you know, point it out and talk about it is valuable.
Yeah, that's what I ended up like coming to, and I was being a bit annoyed, like, oh, okay, like these things happen. We'll get into the specifics of what toxic social norms look like. And I was just like, yeah, like, you know, that's everything. And then I was like, oh, but other communities I've been in don't really talk about it explicitly.
Oh God, not at all.
They do, but it's performative. Like, let's say that like anime convention community. I remember like when people were starting photo shoots, they would always have like someone get a megaphone and be like, yelling like, "Here's the rules," and one of the, like, "Don't touch people without consent." But it's sort of almost an applause light. Like it got to the point where it was this sort of, and then like, structured, "Don't do this, don't do that, we do things this way, blah, blah, blah." And, yeah, I remember like, cosplay is not consent just being this sort of, phrase that like people would use in these big like social gathering. Like, yeah, of course, obviously, like that those are the rules you tell the new people. But then like among like cliques, there was definitely different standards. Like, the Homestuck community was very touchy-feely. And it was sort of like the group norm was you like everybody lays on a pile in the floor. And that was like, so there was sort of like, here's our stated norms, and then but it was sort of like, but like there's lots of caveats and unspoken norms that you have to just figure out.
You've got the anime community. I have the sci-fi lit community, and they have very many strongly woke influenced social norms right now, and even trying to bring those up would be definitely not a thing you would do, and something that might get you cast out. If you want to be a member in good standing, you won't do it often. The thing being that you can't talk about them in other communities is very common, or at least seems to be to me. So the fact that we do...
Yeah, like you can't debate cosplay. Cosplay is not consent. Like, if, you were one of the co-organizers of an anime con and you're like, well, okay, like, so we have this thing, cosplay is not consent, but then, like, also there's, what does that mean? Who does this apply to? Like, if somebody comes to con staff and says, like, this person, inappropriately grabbed my angel wings, and I don't know, like, how do we resolve that? Like, that's why I was saying it's an applause lit. It's something people chant, but it's not like, I never, like, really saw it being... There wasn't like any protocol attached to it.
But that's why we're here. We're going to be talking about this stuff.
Oh, that's why I like the rationality community, because making these things explicit means that you can actually like debate what kinds of norms you should have and which ones are maybe just an applause light or even harmful.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You might say rationality is one lens of viewing things that can also view itself.
Yes.
Whoa. Someone should put that on a mug.
Do it.
I should pretend I made that quote up, just for all of the 3 seconds till someone calls me an asshole for pretending.
So it is pointed out that lots of times the problem is groups develop toxic social norms, which is what this post is about. In the rationalist community, one toxic norm is something like, you must reject beliefs that you can't justify, sentiments that don't seem rational, and woo things. In the EA community, one toxic norm is something like, don't ever indulge in Epicurean style, and never, ever stop thinking about your impact on the world. I can't speak about the EA community because I am not part of it. From my outside observation, this seems to be the case, but who knows? It may not actually be the case for anyone who's in the thing, because
there's enough bleed over. I mean, maybe not Epicurean style, but...
What is Epicurean style? Maybe I'm dumb.
I mean, I don't know either. It's just a quote here. Let's Google it and find out.
Yeah, let's find out, because I don't know either. But while you're looking that up, I was just thinking that I think there's definitely bleed over of the whole, like, never stop thinking about your impact on the world in the rationality community. The hero license, and, like, most people, I think, in the rat community have the idea of effective charity. Like, that to be a good person, you should be donating 10% of your income to... Against Malaria Foundation or
something.
The highest quality charity. At least the idea of there being like better quality ways of giving, I think, is pretty deeply rooted in the rationalist community.
Epicureanism is a form of hedonism, in that it declares pleasure to be its sole intrinsic goal. However, the concept that the absence of pain and fear constitutes the greatest pleasure makes it different from hedonism as it's commonly understood.
Okay. I appreciate that. I knew it sounded like something along the vein of hedonism, but then when it said Epicurean style, for some reason I pictured that like an architectural style, and I had no idea what that was talking about.
I would have assumed it was a philosophy.
Epicureanism argued that pleasure was the chief good in life.
Which I guess it is, but not the kind I was thinking of.
And all this is according to Wikipedia, so let's pray that Wikipedia is not lying to us about what Epicurus said back in the day.
I'm sure it's right.
Wikipedia is great.
What's fun is that I can see I don't know how deep we want to get into this before I point out kind of my stance on half of this post, but I'll just mention really quick that I do know that the EA community is well aware of the fact that if you never ever stop thinking about your impact on the world, you burn out and stop giving an impact, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know any of the key players in this, all the way up to like Will McCaskill and Peter Singer, who are like, always keep your eye on the ball. In fact, they kind of explicitly say the opposite, right?
But they started saying it because it is an issue. Like,
well, it was an issue, and when the philosophy was developed like 50 years ago, I'm sure some form of EA was around before that, but Peter Singer really kicked it off in 1975. But like, yeah, because in fact, I think the essay that, as long as me as like, someone who knows 10% of the shit that I pretend to know, I'll say that basically started the EA movement as we know it today. The essay Famine, Affluence, and Morality.
And that was around 75?
1975, I think.
That doesn't entirely surprise me, seeing as that was basically the nadir of American hedonism.
Or
the peak of hedonism, I guess, depending on how you feel about hedonism.
I think the essay argues that, like, you should keep giving until you're sacrificing something of comparable moral worth to that of the person that you could be saving. And so that does take it all the way to the bottom, to where you're living at sustenance levels or subsistence levels just to keep enough of your life together to keep a job so you can keep giving, right?
Yeah.
So the philosophy's grown along a lot since then.
and they figured out what's sustainable. Like,
Yeah.
because if that is in 75, if all of your adherents are doing that, they're probably all burning out and then having psychological breakdowns. And
I don't know if he had any adherents. Now, that said, I don't know if he was advocating in that essay for a lifestyle choice. What he was saying is that this seems to be the logical implication. This was more of I think that was a bit of a philosophical argument and less of a prescription on how to live. Yeah.
That is very interesting because, like, it was my impression from, like, the outside, having only skimmed the EA stuff, that it was very much you have to give up everything and this is our ideal, that you live, basically hand to mouth and give everything you can away. And, like, maybe that is part of the problem, because he also says, like, of the rationalist community, the toxic norm is you must reject beliefs that you can't justify, sentiments that don't seem rational, and I don't think that's really a norm. But then he adds "and woo things" at the end, and I'm like, hell yeah, get rid of woo things.
yeah, that was when I read that sentence. It was like you shouldn't have beliefs you can't justify, or like sentiments that don't seem rational, and I was just like, yes.
But
I mean, what's wrong with that?
The majority of magicians I know, or I guess I should say wizards or what are they called?
Chaos magic
Right,
peoples?
yeah.
Wiccans?
I mean David and David.
I think only one David is a wizard, but anyway.
No, they're both now.
They're both wizards?
Yeah.
When did this happen? Anyway. Come on, Stephen.
I
I
think,
process that.
practitioners of placebomancy, right? And that I can get behind. Placebomancy, I think, I'm on board with that. The second you start pretending like it's actually doing something, then that's when I get annoyed. But
yeah, I still have to write that essay about that.
please do, because then I can start just pointing them at that rather than... Anyway, I love these guys, and I love what their aim is with this stuff, but they're having fun, and I have no idea to what extent they believe believe in actual magic or not. But I guess what I'm saying is that if I wasn't in the rationalist community, I would know exactly 0 people who do this, right?
Right.
So
I know fewer people in the rationalist community who do this than I did outside of it.
Fair
Again,
enough.
maybe it was because my friends were nerds and anime people, largely, but...
Yeah, I definitely know a lot of people who
Goths.
are into more of the woo tarot card reading kind of stuff.
my stuff might be... My data might be skewed by the fact that I don't know anybody, and I
I don't know humans.
Yeah, I know like 4 people, and 2 of them are in this room. So,
do you think that it's a norm that you must reject beliefs you can't justify? I'm not sure.
I think
I think you should look strongly at beliefs like that, but I don't think reject outright is necessarily the case.
it really depends on what they're talking about here, which bugged me a bit because... Like, when I read that sentence, I was like, I completely agree with this sentence. What's wrong with that? That's not a toxic norm. That's a positive one. Like, you should reject your unjustifiable and woo beliefs. Like,
Absolutely should.
I think your life would be better if you did that, and that's one of the, maybe because it's an aspirational goal. Like, I was trying to, steelman this, where I was like, okay, maybe he's talking about, for example, magicians, like that do card tricks or something, or like reading fiction. and not literally practicing witchcraft.
Well, he includes sentiments that don't seem rational, which I personally have an issue with because I think one of the core rationalist things is that a lot of our emotions and sentiments are heuristics that we've developed over time based on what we've been exposed to, and sometimes they aren't rational and we need to, look into them and reject them, but lots of times the sentiments are there for a good reason, and you don't just reject them because you can't necessarily explain exactly where they came from.
Steel
They're
manning
there for a
this,
reason.
I think what he's saying is...
It feels straw Vulcan-y.
Yeah, that people, maybe people new to the rationality community, or, really, drinking the Kool-Aid.
I think
would,
that's mostly
I
what
can't,
this is.
I can't feel love because it's not rational. Or,
Is there anyone in the community who thinks that? That's the weird thing, right? Like the straw Vulcan has been around for 10 years, as a term. The blog post denigrating that line of thinking has been around for 12.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, having been a side, not tertiary, but a peripheral semi-contributor to the community for 5 years doing this podcast. I feel like I'm not in the middle of the community. Maybe if I was in a group home in the Bay Area, they'd all be talking like this. I have no idea, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't feel like I didn't read that as straw Vulcan-y. I guess I'd reject sentiments that aren't rational. You want to have sentiments that are rational.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that actually does make sense. Don't be mad at the weather. God for dropping a tree branch on your car, right?
Right.
Be mad at your neighbor for being a dipshit who was sawing without a permit and dropped a tree branch on your car. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be mad at anybody, and that's the thing is you find out what you should actually direct your emotions towards and where you should draw them from.
Yeah, but if you are in a room with somebody who kind of gets off on the wrong foot with you and you immediately have kind of a negative reaction to them, and then the things they keep doing over the next hour, you're like, I don't really like this person. That may not be based on a rational analysis of who they are or what they are, but I don't think you should distrust your sentiment. You can be like, yeah, I don't really like this person and I'm not sure I want to be around them, and that's okay.
But that's understanding that intuition is also rational.
Yeah, there's some intuition. I think that's half the reply. The other half might be if you actually can't figure out why you don't like them, maybe it's an indicator that you should give them another shot. Right. And be like, oh, I was just hungry that day. Right? I was mad at everything. Mm-hmm. That could be the solution, or that could be the answer. I don't know. So far I haven't found anything objectionable in what he's saying here, other than I wonder if his characterization of the EA norms is. I mean, again, I'm not saying if he's saying that these are. I'm not clear if he's saying.
I think it's accurate.
If these are the actual norms of the EA community, or if these are the toxic ones that we shouldn't have, because.
Well, these are, the toxic norms.
He says one of the toxic ones is everyone in the room immediately looks at you like you're being rude if you talk about spirituality. And I like that norm because, don't bring spirituality bullshit into this rationalist meetup or whatever. I think that's a good norm, and spirituality in general is bullshit, and we shouldn't bother with it.
I mean, again, I can try to steelman it by, if you're imagining, someone new to the community. Mm-hmm. Maybe would be put off. We want to get new members and then slowly indoctrinate them into the sequences. That makes it sound really evil when I say it like that. But maybe that they're talking about one of the reasons that we have a hard time finding new members or being not intimidating to people is that I guess I can pull from experience. Before I went to actual in-person rationalist meetups, I was really scared that it was going to be a bunch of straw Vulcans and everyone there was going to be so much smarter than me and they'd be reject me for being dumb. Mm-hmm. And everyone there was a lot smarter than me, but it was great.
Look, Jace had a feeling. Let's point and laugh.
Yeah, but that's sort of what I was afraid I was going to run into. And I feel maybe from the outside people might get this group is scary or hostile and not want to join, whereas joining might help them But again, sort of the end of Steelman. I don't want to lose that norm though, that aspirational norm of we try to be rational, and we don't really care about or even tolerate lots of woo and spirituality.
And what are you gonna do when you hear someone say what you just said? Aside from just come to a meeting, please, and see if that's the way it is, because maybe you're gonna love it, which seems like you did, right?
You actually convinced me to go to my first meetup
Huzzah!
when I was in New Jersey and we were still emailing.
I remember saying that. I wasn't aware I was that big of an impact.
No, I thought I told you that.
I mean...
You're directly responsible.
I know, but it was like
This
one
is your
email.
fault.
I don't feel like I was that responsible.
Well...
It's weird when people are like,
Yeah.
you were this big influence. I'm like, all I did was write an email. It doesn't feel like a big deal.
But it is.
So I gotta
Okay,
be careful.
well,
I think that's just life.
Okay.
I told the person who got me into programming that, like, you know, thanks for putting my whole life on an entirely new trajectory, and he's like, that actually freaked me out, you just saying that. You know? I just sent you a link for a book, and I'm like, well, you know, I think that's just how life works. You know, my wife got into her line of work because her second roommate in college was doing that. You know, just things happen.
Some things matter that seem like they shouldn't, and
Yeah.
just vice versa.
But see, that almost sounds like spirituality. So that was going to be my contention with this. Is for the last several approaching a decade years, my context for spirituality is like almost explicitly in the Sam Harris context, not like the Deepak Chopra context.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just I would want to find a different word of what it is. What is he talking about there? Like the soul or religion or Reiki magic, or is he talking about like the sense of awe and wonder you get when you contemplate the cosmos? Because that sounds I've heard both called
That's
spiritual.
why I think that these words are like things you can't justify, sentiments that don't seem rational, woo things. Like you could steel man or straw man these really easily. Since we as a community, I think, have a positive norm of steel manning, I want to say that like what he's saying that you shouldn't outright reject are things like the rationalist solstice, like things that feel good that don't like harm anyone. Like I don't know, playing Magic the Gathering.
Well, I mean, even though I personally haven't gone to Rationalist Solstice, I'm okay with other people doing it. I've never told anyone they shouldn't. I'm just like, that's not really my thing. But, you know.
Yeah, I want to, like, I find myself wanting to weasel around like that by, like, because I keep thinking of, I keep trying to straw man it even though I want to steel man it. Like,
And maybe if I went to a secular or a Rationalist Solstice, it would be much like the Less Wrong meetup thing that you experienced, where actually it's great.
Yeah, like, rationally, I don't know, you can pick apart a social ritual and realize that, like, I'm gonna do a thing that the person says you shouldn't do, like, in, like, the next paragraph, but, you know, going to a community gathering, doing a ritual, has these, like, evolutionary ties to connectedness and well-being, and releases a bunch of endorphins, like orexin and oxytocin, and, like improves your life in measurable ways. And yeah, like Sasha actually says like people can't like, you know, just say that they like doing a thing without having to justify it using rationalist jargons. Like I was just sort of like I sort of just did that exact thing, but I'm like, but like you can. That's why I sort of disagree a bit with the premise here, where I'm like I think it's good to know things sort of based on our sequences. Like if you know why social rituals are good, you can cut out the bullshit, like the believing in shit that doesn't exist, and the, you know, predatory communities that can form around churches and whatever, and like keep the parts that are good.
See, I think it's the predatory communities thing that he's trying to get to, because so far what we've said is these norms are great. We like these norms. Huzzah for these norms. And then he says, like in the next bullet point I pulled out near the bottom, he says like, yeah, these norms are great. He literally says these norms are great. Toxic social norms don't develop intentionally. No one wants them to happen. He says that talking about epistemics and being curious about beliefs is cool. That's awesome. But then he says, but then the group acts like a group. As we were saying, this happens in all groups. Which is to say, people confer status depending on level of apparent adherence to values. This leads insecure people who completely depend on the group to over-identify with the set of values, to the extent that even slightly contrary actions become forbidden. And, like, I think that's probably true and the case in any sort of group. The old saying is that there's no one as zealous as the new convert. But, I mean, isn't the problem there that people are insecure and completely depend on the group for their identity? Like, that's the thing that needs to be addressing. Try to get people to not be so insecure and base their entire identity on one group.
Yeah, I kept flashing back to a talk I had with Wes like years ago about the whole idea of keeping your identity small.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of sounds like almost the same conclusion that we kind of came to, where I was sort of arguing, I didn't agree that you should keep your identity small, and Wes was arguing for, and we kind of came to, maybe, okay, don't, like, narrow your identity, but just have lots of them. Like, you can have an identity as, you know, a parent and a spouse and a researcher and a polo hobbyist, and, like, the more stuff that you have, the more stuff you have that defines you. Like, if one of them gets kicked out from under you, it doesn't mean that your personality collapses entirely.
You guys said you had this conversation a few years ago?
Yeah.
You know what's fun is I feel like that's what Julia Galef concluded in, or talked about in The Scout Mindset, a book that came out like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
That's just fun that you guys, you know, Julia Galef is a major figure in the community, and you guys were 5 years ahead of a conclusion that...
Well, I think The Scout Mountain is a formalization and publishing of something which has been in her train of thought for a long time.
Totally.
I think that probably wasn't an original, like, Wes and Jay's thought.
I don't keep
there was a lot of
small
discussion.
as, like a Robin Hansen post from way back in the
Yeah,
day.
and there was a lot of discussion around it. Like, there has been.
Well, I'm going to give you guys at least, I don't know, half of an original finding point each. You know? Like you can independently come across, you know, an idea that someone else also has. I was just thinking that it was cool that Galef put forward a similar idea. But yeah, you're right. This is not, you know, her conclusion after 5 years of thinking about stuff. This is, like I said, an amalgamation, a publicly consumable version of this stuff.
This has been kind of a background norm of the community, one might say.
Yeah.
Yeah. The post kind of answers itself. I noticed too. Like, I think I could almost sum it up by saying, like, you know, when as a writer, when you're trying to create an antagonist, you take character traits. Like, you make a really interesting villain if you take positive character traits and then just push them to the limit. So, like, so you've got, like, a duke who is all about honor, but then you just push that character trait so much that he's, like, doing things for honor that are unethical. Or, like, so obsessed with it that it becomes fascism. And so I think this post is saying, we have these cool norms, but if you take them way too much to an extreme and, like, live your life exclusively based on this, then that can become really bad.
Yeah.
And then, like, the thing that you have to do is grow up. It actually literally says at the end, like, maybe this is just growing up. And I was, like, kind of nodding along, like, yeah, I think that's what you're describing here. It's just, maybe people in the rationalist community are more, like, struggle with this more, because it does tend to be a lot of, like, isolated people who just know about this community from the internet, or people that were nerds and didn't really have the kind of experience of being part of History Club or, like, the anime clique or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
So
I think you're definitely going to, not definitely, but I think it's very likely that people who have had a hard time finding a society will over-identify and latch on really strongly to something. But again, I think that's not a problem with the rationalism per se. It's the problem
with communities.
Yeah, and it's also the problem of having had a kind of a shitty childhood or adolescence where you didn't have very many people and you felt alone a lot. And it's great to have this community, and sure, you might overcorrect and try to overfit yourself to this group that matches you very well. But like I said, it's like he said, it's a process that starts out kind of cruddy, but people get over it, hopefully. I guess maybe the toxic problem is if a society encourages that and discourages people from getting over it, but I don't think that's rationalism.
I was going to say that I think the failure mode is people, like, this is their first community. They never, you know, had these experiences in middle school, like My Little Pony Club or whatever, so, you know, like, this is my religion, you know, these are my people, and then you get disillusioned, and then you drop out.
Yeah.
Where I saw a lot of people do that, like, people whose first community was, let's say, the Steven Universe fandom was really toxic. To the point where I had friends that refused to watch the show because the fandom was so toxic.
Oh, damn.
And they associated the show with the fandom. And it's really funny because if anyone hasn't seen Steven Universe, it's this just, like, super wholesome and quite good animated TV series.
I love it.
And the fandom
so
just
glad.
got so social justice-y that they became one of those groups that, like, you have to walk on eggshells around anyone because it was all just people calling each other out.
I'm so glad I never got involved in that fandom. I would have hated having my love for that thing ruined.
For what it's worth, I'm basically in the camp of people who hasn't seen this show partly for that reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, and I could enjoy it in isolation and never go do anything about it, right? But some of the fun is going to whatever r/Steven Universe and just seeing what, people are saying about something or whatever, right? And if it's all calls to kill artists who drew characters too thin, then it's like, okay, I think that I don't like the kind of people who like this show. And then maybe I won't like it. So I sort of just infer that I wouldn't like the show, right?
I mean, that's...
If that is your, like, your only experience with Steven Universe, then, like, you're probably like, oh. I mean, that kept me off Rick and Morty for a while because the fandom was that whole, doing the whole, you have to have a high IQ to understand Rick and Morty. And I was like, yeah, this show's probably just about a bunch of douchebags. And it is, but it's a really good show.
I feel like, I don't know, I must be some kind of weird person that disassociates the art from the artist a lot because... Like, I keep hearing things about people who won't read Ender's Game because Orson Scott Card is a Mormon, and people who won't watch... anti-gay, and people who won't watch The Cosby Show because Bill Cosby's a rapist.
Wait, people don't like Mormons now?
Lots of people don't like Mormons. The church specifically is very anti-gay.
I guess. I just figured, I
if
don't know. When was the last time I heard a Mormon causing a conflict?
If you're an atheist, would, you want to read a fiction story written by somebody who's, deeply religious?
I actually do, and I don't mind. I hear about people who won't read, or who have trouble enjoying things by Wildbow because he's kind of a douchebag, and
in certain ways.
And I just it's weird. I totally understand. Okay, you see a convicted rapist on the screen, that's going to make comedy harder for you to enjoy, but I don't get that feeling, and I don't know why that is. And I think I'm the weird one here because everyone else seems to have it.
I think there's a difference with, today I learned Orson Scott Card was Mormon, right? So, I can read the entire book and never know who wrote it, or, never know more beyond the name, right?
I'm glad I read it as a kid before I knew that, because that might have put me off from it, too.
If I went to go watch The Cosby Show, I think it would be hard not to feel a little bummed every time Cosby came on the screen, just because you know what's happening when the camera stops rolling. And so, you might still be able to appreciate the lessons that the show is getting across, but it's just I can't come out of this feeling refreshed and wholesome because I know what's going on, behind the set there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't tried that experiment though.
I think I have a mix of both. I don't know if I want to call them views or whatever, philosophies. When you're gonna invest time in a new book or a TV series, you want to have some knowledge going in generally, because there's so much media to consume. At least, that's where I come from. God, there's so many books. I'll never read them all.
I don't think there's any connection between who an artist is and the work they produce.
I think there definitely is. There's some Orson Scott Card books that I didn't read because they were way... he dragged their religion into them. Even,
Yeah, but in that case...
sequels to Ender's Game got more and more religious and, became less interesting to me.
But in those cases, the work itself sucks. So N.K. Jemisin is a pretty horrible person, and...
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the latest book she wrote is probably one of the most racist things I've read in decades. It's terrible. But she also wrote the 5th season, which is in, my top 5 books of all time. It's fucking amazing. It's a work of genius. She's a great writer, and just because she's awful doesn't mean that's not one of the best books that has ever been put out there, in my opinion. So, whatever. I know a lot of people don't like... what's his name? The guy who writes Starship Troopers, Heinlein, because he's had weird sex stuff and his political opinions are all over the place, and I think he's changed his political opinions quite a few times in his life. But
I should hope
that doesn't make the works that he wrote when he had weird opinions bad or anything. It just makes them kind of weird and cool to read.
I think I like there to be some information going in, because I think that who a person is and what they believe does influence the kind of art they make, and then there's some association between that and whether I'm going to be interested in it or not. Knowing J.K. Rowling is a transphobe, that's sort of a bad example because I'm not really a huge fan of J.K. Rowling anyway, but
I think
if all I read was Harry Potter and then say she was writing another... I don't know if she actually is.
They're doing a new movie.
Oh.
I saw a trailer for it. It has... Daniel Radcliffe and all the OG actors.
Is it a sequel?
Yeah.
In the Harry Potter universe?
Yeah.
Holy crap.
I hope
welcome
it's
back
not based on the really terrible play.
I think it is called The Cursed Child.
Yeah. God, how are they going to adapt that? It was so bad.
I'm desperately curious too.
Can I?
But
I don't
I was
wanna
just
ruin
amazed
it.
they got back the
I do
actual
wanna
folks
ruin
to
it
do
for
this.
everyone.
All right. So,
But I think the weirdest, I think
I've already
she's
spoiled
a
it.
great example, J.K. Rowling, that like people loved Harry Potter and then like they disagree with her trans stuff. I don't even know where she falls anymore, and now they hate Harry Potter. I'm like, it should be completely separate. John C. Wright is a crazy fucking Catholic, but he wrote a great series of sci-fi.
What I was gonna say was, if J.K. Rowling was writing, like another 12 or however goddamn many books of Harry Potter, I'd be way less interested in them, knowing that like
she's probably throwing a line about
characters-
boys, girls, and girls' bathrooms.
Yeah, I
or
don't know.
whatever.
Like
They did have gender segregated bathrooms in Hogwarts.
And magically gender segregated dormitories.
One
Like
of
the
the
stairs
things
wouldn't
that,
let you up if you were a guy into the women's dorm or into the girls' dormitory.
I think
really?
not vice versa though.
Right, not vice
It only
versa.
kept guys out of the girls'
Yeah.
Okay.
areas because never would the opposite be a problem.
Now, that said, reading that as a 12-year-old, I thought that was just kind of like a funny, cute thing. And, the asymmetry probably struck me, but, I was familiar with the movies from the 80s that involved panty raids and stuff, and I'd never heard of an underwear raid going the other way. So, like, I got where the trope was coming from. I didn't read anything into it. Really quick. Wait. I was just going to... Do I think that there was some agenda there?
Yeah.
Probably
well,
not.
Not only, I don't think there was an agenda, I think that she wasn't necessarily wrong. Like, maybe symmetry would be great, but if you're only going to have it one way, keeping the guys out of the girls' area is the more important one.
I really loved the fact that Methods of Rationality pointed out the weird hypocrisy where the world of Harry Potter is apparently... There's no sexism and hasn't been, because J.K. Rowling didn't want to like write a sexist world, but then it makes no fucking sense why like all of the political figures are male. And,
You mean like the one political figure, the prime minister?
I mean, there's like the Wizengamot and like the majority of the instructors. Like in Methods of Rationality, Harry, or one of the characters, maybe it was Hermione, like pointed out, they're like, hey, our society doesn't have sexism like Muggles, except then why does our society kind of look like it has sexism?
Did Rowling's...
We need
Like,
more.
the thing is that she's not imaginative enough to write a convincing world where sexism doesn't exist. She just
Gotcha.
says, it doesn't exist, but then, like, you see stuff like gender segregation and a male-dominated parliament.
Yeah,
I
it was
never
a
read-
kid's book. I didn't.
never read far enough in the series to know how the Parliament was made up.
I can't remember the OG Wizengamot either. I just remember.
Also, all the goblins are male.
Oh, really? Do they just not have females of the species, or
They didn't think
are they like
about it.
Ferengi, where the females have to stay naked and hidden?
The thing is that if you're, I don't know,
I just only remember like the two goblins. I think there was Griphook and maybe one other that I remember from the entire series.
I think all the house elves were male.
No, there was definitely female house elves. Winky was a main figure in the fourth one.
Yeah, I
She was the
remember
one that
female
worked
house
for the
elves.
Krauts.
Oh, I didn't remember that one because
Or
I don't think she's
Crouches.
in the movies.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she wasn't in the movie. Yeah, there was a whole thing where, and that's
Just count the number of male characters
I mean,
versus female.
I'll never read the books again, but I guess really quick, I was actually going to zoom back out. How do we get on the subject in the first place about authors and art and that sort of thing?
Well, I know a way to segue it
keeping
back
identity
in.
small, I think. Yeah.
We got. I don't know if our identities were big or small in the last 10 minutes.
Well, they were the only thing of importance in the room, so I think maybe they got a bit big.
No, it was fun though. I was
Okay.
just curious. I couldn't because I looked back at the notes of like the things we pulled out of the doc, and I'm like, how did we get on this? You said you had a way to pull us back out.
Yeah, one of the things they mention is art. That some people in the rationality community are afraid to do weird art.
Okay, so this was a weird ass thing that like I had made no sense to me at all. Yeah, he starts by saying that the people in the movement can feel that it's unethical or kind of dirty to perform behavior your peers would think distasteful, and they aren't like contrary to explicit values. They just don't feel in the group aesthetic. And then he says, yeah, rationality is cool, which is great, becomes through a series of steps. It's uncool if you want to spend a lot of time doing stuff that has nothing with testable beliefs or our favorite issues. And he says,
Don't think you've seen that.
what?
You don't think you've seen that bottom of the slippery slope there? Because I don't think I have.
I haven't.
I
either.
have.
You have?
Or at least it's something I've struggled with. When I first got into rationality, I was working at a video games company as largely an artist, and one of my favorite hobbies is like drawing comics and writing, and I did end up shifting towards a STEM career, but like I have a really hard time even now like justifying spending time writing or drawing as a hobby. Less so because I like notice my confusion and then like struggle with that.
Huh.
And again, I think I can justify that with do the thing I'm not supposed to do by like using rationalist jargon to justify it. But like it's sort of the same thing with EAs can't actually live in basically poverty, like giving everything and spending all of their mental energy on that. That's just not how humans work, and they don't thrive like that.
Yeah.
You will burn out if you just spend all of your time trying to earn to give and not doing anything hedonistic. Same thing with like having hobbies. It's important as a human. And also art can be a form of communication and like a way to process your emotions. So it's super rational to do art and valuable.
Interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, Sasha.
Sasha's quote was
justifying my thing with rationalist
Sasha
framework.
Said, a few rationalists have told me that they feel like they shouldn't make weird art because it's dumb and unrationalist to do so. And you're saying you feel that way too.
Yeah, it's hard not, like, you know, it takes like hours, like maybe like 12 hours sometimes to do like a really cool Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
And there definitely are times where I've just been like working on a thing for fun and I'm sitting there for hours, you know, tweaking pixels and being like, why the hell am I doing this? I could be doing something productive.
That is something productive. You're producing a piece of art.
But like, maybe one that no one will ever see.
Well, you're getting better at producing art, and like, maybe someone will see it.
Yeah, I mean, like, those are the thoughts that I have to counter the, like, negative, you know? Okay. But I can see why people would think that. Like, I don't know, say that you...
I'm glad that we brought this up and that you're saying this, because when I read that, I was like, that's ridiculous.
I know somebody put a note, what the fuck, really?
Yeah, that was my note, yeah, because, I mean, one of the most famous works of rationalism is a Harry Potter fanfic.
Right.
But see, I think I was going to bring that up, and I wonder if that actually counts as a piece of weird art, because that was, like, directed towards the goal of getting more people into this sort of thing, and it had an explicit... one,
it was instrumental,
higher level goal.
But then, the candle has no higher level goal.
No, not really. But, you know, I mean, well, I haven't finished it yet. But maybe Alexander Wales isn't Eliezer Yudkowsky in the Community, right? But, like, Yudkowsky also, so, HPMR aside, but Yudkowsky also wrote, like, the girl ruined by the internet is this chosen savior. Right. He wrote True Love's Kiss, and, like, you know, other sort random shit that, like, I don't think is that you can make a case that is rationalist art or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's just fun. Mm-hmm. And so it seems weird that, like, one might struggle with, like, how can I spend my time unproductively? Let me look to the elders of my community, and then you observe
doing crazy ass shit.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, granted they do a lot with the time that they do engage.
Scott Alexander writes so fucking much. And he was, like, writing Slate Story Codex when he had I think, full-time, like, psychiatrist job.
And was writing Unsung at the same time.
I know. His productivity is through the roof, and it angers me somewhat. I mean, like, I'm glad he exists and that he has that work ethic. But, man, if I, like, was just comparing myself to him...
I mean, if people are getting the feeling that they shouldn't do things... It just strikes me as such a weird thing. I don't know where they're getting that. Apparently, I guess, I mean, one of the co-hosts of this show got that impression, so it's got to be somewhere out there, but it feels...
I think it's a universal, really common thing, though, the same way that all of this is with communities. Like, again, if you're making your whole identity the My Little Pony community in middle school, you might start to feel bad about watching another show. Because it's like, oh, none of my peers... like Ninja Turtles or whatever the hell. Mm-hmm. And so I, like, can't really talk to them about this. And it's not, it's like violent and it's against, you know, the tenets of My Little Pony, which is all about friendship and conflict management.
And you might certainly feel guilty for spending, you know, 60 hours writing a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan fiction.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I thought my life was about ponies, right? Yeah, I can see that example. I think it also, like I said, or like you said, works for any other group that people are getting just newly invested in, one that has cultural norms rather, not just like a community. You know, if you go to depending on how into the gym you get, that also is a thing, right? You know, what do you mean off days? What do you mean you only go 4 days a week? You know, like, I could see where that could get toxic at the extremes.
My example of this is, again, sci-fi lit, because I want to write something good, and when it's flowing and coming...
More good things, Eneash. I won't let you say that you haven't written anything good.
Okay, well, when it's flowing and it's coming out, it's great, but sometimes you just get hung up for weeks at a time, and a different post that Sasha wrote, because I read through some of the stuff after finding this, was that, like, if you're having trouble being creative, the problem is you're lying to yourself. You're writing what you think you should write, and that's labor and it's hard and you'll resist it. Just write what you love writing. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so, because there's things I want to write that are just fucking fun, but, like, they don't have any status to them. They aren't exploring deeper issues or
the next
ideas.
American,
like, you know,
the great American novel.
Writing Amazing Man 2 was fun as all fuck, but it's not gonna win any sort of literature prizes. And every now and then you're like, well, I want to just have, like, some explosions or boobs or something here, but that would not be great literature, so I can't do that. And I think once
you write
people
the boob
get
explosion
off,
in your first draft, and then you just, like, cut it out.
I think when people get over themselves and just start writing what they love to write, it comes a lot easier. And, and that stuff is still really fun. I read Hard Luck Hank recently, which was just boobs and explosions of the PG-13 variety. It was fucking fun as hell. I
mean, I think there's something to be said for that, but also I think that it's cool to make aspirational art too.
But, like, I've never gotten the impression from the sci-fi lit community, no one's ever said, oh, it's dumb and anti-sci-fi just to write fun shoot-'em-up things. You shouldn't do that.
There's definitely a market for it too. Like,
I
think that's where people that have that philosophy, like, if you look at 50 Shades of Grey was originally a Twilight fanfic, which was a book that was basically fanfic quality to start with. And then all you had to do is just change the names, and it's, like, massively successful and popular. So, like, I think, yeah, there's a place for both, like, cool entertainment and then also, like, works that require lots of research and some hard work.
But I think the fact that there was no such norm explicitly stated, but I still internalized it to the point where it was hard for me to...
It's hard to turn that filter off.
Yeah.
That's why...
So, I mean, I kind of get what he's saying, but also, like, that's not really the community's fault in so much as it's my fault for being a pretentious prat.
I mean, I think that writing... There is the whole concept of, like, writing the next great American novel, and there's definitely a difference of status between published novels and fanfic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the society, the community, the culture rubbed off on you. That's not your own failing there.
But it's also not the failing of the general broader sci-fi community.
Well, all writers struggle with that. I mean, there was a ratfic that I think was an Alicorn one called Earthfic, where, the one where it just flipped, that, like, writing, like, fanfic was high status, and the main character was writing what they called Earthfic, which was, like, I think just, like, sort of slice of life, maybe, like
pretentious literature.
Yeah. And everybody was just like, oh, I can't believe you're writing that trash, like, you're never gonna get published.
I mean, if you have fun writing what you have fun writing, and you have aspirations to be, an esteemed author, right? And so, yes, part of that endeavor is going to feel like work, because that's the goal there isn't, like, just have fun writing whatever I want. It's to write a book for consumption by people who will give this, accolades, right?
Yeah, but I think that's ultimately a bad goal. The goal should be just have fun writing whatever you want.
I agree to some extent, but you also, like, want to make money doing this too, right? Like,
I have given up on that particular idea.
Well, I guess, I don't know. I don't want to talk you into,
you
like,
want to get published.
Doing something. Yeah, I don't want to talk you into doing something that you hate doing, but if, I guess I'm just thinking, like, in the broad scope, like, sometimes you have a goal that is not about having fun all the time the whole way there, right?
Yeah.
And
art is a pain in the ass.
It definitely can be,
Like
right?
I said, spending hours tweaking pixels, like, there's parts of art that I hate. I mean, like, it's kind of a love-hate thing when you, like, get good enough at it, but, like, I don't know, like, if you love woodworking, too, there's also going to be parts of that you hate. Like, I think that, I notice I keep kind of coming into everything in the middle, or, like, both and. But, like, I support the middle way, and I think I just want to reiterate, I think that there's validity to just, write what you love and don't worry about it being dumb or whatever. But then, like, I don't want to discourage people who do really want to write an epic fantasy and do lots of research into Nordic civilization to base their elves off of and get really into, like, plot structures and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, the stories I really like reading are the kind of rat fic or just smart fiction, like you were talking about, Worth the Candle. There was another one you brought up like Wild Bow stuff.
Unsung?
Or like things that aren't explicitly rat fic, but are the kinds of things that are like really enjoyed by this community, whether or not there's a goal to them.
Yeah.
Like Methods of Rationality was sort of trying to teach people the sequences in the form of fanfic, whereas like Worth the Candle is more of just Alexander Wales experimenting with. I realize that I shouldn't spoil it because.
Well, in the interest of not spoiling it, shall we move on?
Yeah, where were we?
He was
toxic norms.
Yeah, let's talk about kind of what toxic norms are in the broad scope, because I feel like his definition was interesting, and I don't disagree with it, but it's not what if you'd asked me to define a toxic norm, it's not what I would have given.
You're saying his definition of a toxic norm is any rule where following it makes you feel like large parts of you are bad?
Yeah. I like that, and I don't quite know what I would have said if you'd asked me, last week, what do you think a toxic norm is? I might have said one that, like, an immediate leap towards hostility or uncharity or something like that, right? But maybe that's just from a certain point of view.
I think
that's a pretty good definition.
I think it is too. Like I said, it's just not the one I would have thought of.
I think a toxic norm is like something that would constrain you from behaving the way that you normally would in a way that you don't endorse. Because I like the norms being there to constrain me in ways that I want. Like, for example, our last episode about the procrastination equation reminded me of how useful that was, and I ended up using it again.
Speaking of that...
And, I was going to say, and like things like accountability.
We had a thing where you were going to be running for at least 10 minutes, at least, what was it, 5 times between then and now?
I forget if it was 5 or 6, but I ran 5 days a week the last 2 weeks, and I have photographic evidence.
So 10 times total?
Yeah.
God damn!
And, I want to get back... Well, the point was I just wanted to get back in the habit, but, I have just been... I'm adding 5 minutes, so I'm at 15 on Monday. I'm going to do 20 minutes, and I'm just increasing the speed a bit. And I want to get back to like the point where I was before I got really out of shape, like 2 years ago, where I could run for 30 minutes and do that like daily. Because I think that was like my best, like my peak mental health period.
Congratulations!
When I had that regularity and exercise. Turns out blood flow is good for your brain.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, I liked getting your status updates on that, because it's great seeing somebody succeed, right?
And I love being in a community where where that idea of like accountability and positive peer pressure is something that we think is cool. And then but a toxic version of that might be, let me see if I can think of one.
Well, he gives examples of what he thinks toxic norms are, if you want to.
Well, okay, his examples are... The EA version's thinking you're evil if your soul/body/emotions are crying out for you to relax, slack off a bit, and spend money on yourself, because you ought to be spending every possible moment working on human flourishing. And a rationalist version is thinking that you're stupid and not worth talking to if you yearn for the spiritual/aesthetic/woo/non-justifiable, or if you haven't been able to come to grips with your issues through rational means. Which, again, I'm kind of gritting my teeth as I'm reading that, because I kind of... Yeah. This leads to emotional damage being ignored, intuition being dismissed, and systematizing being preferred inappropriately above all other modes of thinking and feeling. I still find myself of two minds here, where on one hand, I'm like, if I'm still manning it, it's like, you can't like art or poetry, and you shouldn't do therapy because you should just be able to think your way out of your depression.
No one says that, though.
Yeah, I think that they're...
Or if someone does say that, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, like, I think that this is saying, like, the straw Vulcan ideal.
But the straw Vulcan isn't an ideal.
That people fall into, but, like, I don't know.
I guess some people could fall into it, but we should help them not fall into that and be like, hey, this is a bad ideal.
Yeah, the thing...
Which is kind of what we're doing on this podcast right now.
I like that this was something we talked about, and I do think it's something we can improve at as a community, but I also, like, keep, like, gritting my teeth at sentences like, if you yearn for the, spiritual woo, non-justifiable, and I'm kind of like, but what does that mean? Does that mean think you like to watch, like, Marvel movies, or does that mean that you, think that there's a God.
Yeah,
You're like
right.
a deist or something.
There's differences in scope here. Like, do you believe that the Pope talks to Jesus or something? That's an issue. Whereas, like, he actually included if you yearn for the aesthetic. I'm like, what the? I yearn for the aesthetic. I think it's very important in my life.
And it's also instrumental, like, and that's why, like, I keep doing the thing that he says not to do. But like, the whole idea of, for example, like, emotions are bad and you should be able to think your way out of depression instead of doing therapy. I'm like, I'm doing EMDR therapy where I follow a dot going back and forth on my screen while I talk about my childhood traumas, and there's a reason that it works. Like, you're shifting the hemispheres of your brain and, like, getting those, spinning wheels that are off separate, connected to the rest of the nodal network of your brain. I mean, I'm not using neurological terminology here, but it kind of ties back into the idea of the brain network / clock.
But I think
it works because of real, physical attributes of the world, and I can be like, my goal is to not be depressed, and then I can do this systematized method that involves a bunch of emotions that are totally rational.
And it works in a way that praying doesn't.
I think, importantly, even if you had no idea how it worked, even if, like, the practitioners didn't know why it worked, and it did, they're like, hey, we noticed that if you move your eyes back and forth, or if you tap your shoulders alternately to a slow rhythm while talking about this stuff, that helps. Like, even if they had no idea why that was the case, it wouldn't matter about the results. I guess what's interesting, so I guess two things. One, I've never encountered more support and endorsement for therapy than I have in the rationalist community. Again, I'm not involved in that many other communities, but, like, everyone here is super cool about it.
And psychology are fields of science that we know things about. So, like, it almost feels like this is an outdated, argument.
It was written a few weeks ago.
So what brings that to mind, that brings me to the second point, though, is that I think that he's not saying that these are the norms. He's saying that these are the toxic versions of the norms that some people have, and that some people might fall into on accident, right? So, like, if I'm some, star-eyed, young new entrant into the rationalist community, I might think that this should have all the solutions to all my problems, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's like, no, actually, you got to go talk about your feelings with the doctor and take pills that'll make you feel better instead, right? Like, you might think, well, then I thought the tools of rationality were supposed to be all that I needed. Like, so I can see how that might happen.
I guess it's a good reminder to look out for those sorts of people and help them out and be like, this is not the be-all, end-all everything. This is just another good tool.
Yeah. And look at that for yourself, too. If you're feeling bad about watching whatever it is that you like to watch, or, spending time making art that isn't enhancing the world in a rationally productive way or something, like, give yourself a pass and say I'm having fun, and that matters.
There was a rationalist adjacent person who once made a video called Shit Rationalists Say, and at the very end of it, the last thing the rationalists say was because it's fun, which I think is pretty darn important. Like, lots of times the justification is just 'cause it's fun, and that's more than enough. What other justification do you need?
And fun is instrumental because it, elevates your happiness hormones and
sure, but
creates
who cares about that? The point is that it's fun.
I would want this to be an essay that someone saw if they were, like, new to this community. Like, I feel like this is important and it has a place. I think the reason I keep pushing against it, like, one of the reasons internally, is that I feel like as the rationalist community is so good as a community at looking at itself, the lens that views itself. I've already seen this argument a bunch of times, or not argument, but, like, people in the rationalist community are concerned about the straw Vulcan thing, and they've talked about it to death, I think, that, like, here's the failure mode. And same with EAs. It's like, that's why I was saying it feels like a bit of an outdated argument. Like, one of the major issues that like people talk about all the time in the EA community is the idea of burnout. And the, like, idea that you need to put on your own oxygen mask first. You need to, like, have a relatively, like, stable, happy place yourself in order to help others, and that's not a new idea. So the thing you were just doing earlier and calling out multiple times says, one sign of toxic social norms is if your behavior does deviate from the standard, you feel the only way of saving face is through explaining your behavior via the group values. I think that's just people should stop doing that. They can just say, I like to do this thing because I like it. I like to analyze everything that I do.
Very well. I will not stop you from doing that if that is what you like.
It's not like I haven't been doing that my whole life, though. Like, before I knew about rationality,
Yeah.
I was, like, coming up with theorems about different things in, like, my school textbooks, the margins.
See, that just seems like a Jace thing to do, though. You're not doing that because you feel like it makes you a good rationalist.
It's literally fun to analyze things.
Exactly.
I do, like, literary analyses for fun sometimes.
I mean, I do literary analysis for fun every week.
I know.
With a certain Stephen.
I'm so glad that I'm in this community of people that find that fun, because I was always the weirdo that was like, I'm going to write an essay about this book I just read. Like, for school? No, because it was an interesting book.
Yeah, for me.
Weirdo.
Sasha does have a couple caveats. The first one is that I pulled out is that he says EAs and rationalists are probably less toxic than the average group, and a lot of their principles are great. These groups are just the ones I'm most familiar with right now. So that was why he put that in, and that's why we also talked about like the anime group and the sci-fi lit groups.
Yeah, and I do think that it's possible that EAs and rationalists might be especially susceptible to these kinds of social norms, again, just because like this might be someone's first community. I know that a lot of people attracted to these communities did like sort of grow up being the weirdo that was socially isolated, and if you haven't, you know, been in the middle school My Little Pony club, or like et cetera, and seen here's the ways that like social norms can flip around on themselves and become bad, like ones that you think are great. Like charity becomes bad when it's like you're giving away so much that you're harming yourself, or doing it to the exclusion of other things.
I think this could be a common failure mode for any group that is mostly young nerds.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that Rationality and EA both have these very lofty goals that has concerned a lot of people about like the ways that like Less Wrong and mostly just Less Wrong, I guess, like is cult-like, because it's like the goal of the rationalist community is to save the world from AI, and the goal of EA is to save the world.
Yeah.
So it's sort of I think it can put huge pressure on people, more so than like, you know, the My Little Pony community's goal is like be friends or whatever, like be nice, memorize the names of all the ponies or whatever, like so I could see, first of all, like someone who's like, this is their first community, they're like young and nerdy and might have been socially isolated, and then they joined a group that's like, we're saving the world, and you can be a part of it, but you have to. That's some extra pressure there. I
don't know. Personally, I think that the rationalist community group has drifted a bit. Like, I think that Save the World from AI is a very close second, and it almost feels to me like the primary rationalist goal now is make the human race better by, you know, helping them be more rational.
Through friendship and ponies. Yeah, I think, I mean, that secondary goal sounds great until we get wiped out and turned into paper clips. So, I think,
and then you're like, oh, it should have been the first goal after all.
But that's the exact line of thinking that could make somebody, you know, fall prey to these toxic norms.
Right. I guess, I feel like there's too much to cover here for me just to give, like, my final thought on it. This, you know, because I mean, I'll just put it out there, but I don't know, I guess I've been totally fine with half-assing my contributions to, and my involvement with the EA and rationalist communities and lifestyles. Mm-hmm. I give money in an effective way. I don't give as much money as I could. Mm-hmm. I'm 1/3 of a podcast that's sort of rationalist, depending on who you ask. Mm-hmm. And that's about it. Yeah. But like, I guess that might just be my predisposition with how I interact with stuff. And so I don't know if I'm in the best position to like analyze the problem modes that these sort of things have. I can see, I think I'm glad he keeps bringing up EA, because there is like an obvious bad way that goes, right? You know, if someone says, okay, I'm going to hate my life and I'm going to go become like an investment, you know, banker or hedge fund manager, make a bunch of money so I can donate a ton of it. And it turns out that they hate their life and they stop after like 2 years. Well, then, you know, if you were going to do it for 40, even if you're only going to make 80% as much, if you stop after 2 years, well, you've not given basically everything you could have given if you just hadn't done it the wrong way to start out with, right? Mm. So like there is an obvious failure mode for that. But I feel like that's an owned and accepted problem and like an addressed problem. Like, it's not like this is what effective altruists are advocating for. I can still see, though, how one might have an awareness of the community and still feel bad about it, right? You know, man, how do I justify buying $100 pair of shoes? Mm-hmm. You know, like that is, you know, there's a perfectly serviceable $25 pair of shoes here. And, you know, sure, they'll fall apart, but, you know, it's whatever. Like, I can imagine how that people might struggle with that. So, yeah, I should have formulated my final thoughts before I started them. My short answer is, like, just don't. Like, don't worry about it. I mean, so
I'm one of those people that struggles with that. Like, I have a ton of guilt about buying things. I would never buy a $100 pair of shoes. I buy clothes secondhand. Like,
I do that, but not because I have guilt. I just have other things I'd rather spend the money on.
Well, I have like a ton of guilt about not being vegan. I think that vegans are better people than me. If I were a better person, I'd have more willpower or whatever. But like,
that sounds like a toxic norm.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have a bunch of unendorsed thoughts that I, you know, as just someone with anxiety and depression, learning rationality helped me be able to deal with that. But also, I don't know, I've sort of questioned how much I've fallen prey to the toxic norms myself. Like, I did quit a, you know, job as a game designer for Disney to move into a STEM field because I wanted to have a more impactful career. And it's sort of like, what was my real reason there? I think it was genuine interest in science and genuine, like, wanting.
Well, and if you wanted to have a career,
but I don't
where you
know.
made an
I might
impact,
just be lying to myself. It's really interesting that, like, when my in-group became, like, STEM people, I shifted towards STEM, and it felt like it was my own decision, and maybe it was.
Well, I mean, it's the sort of thing where, like, again, I mentioned how, or I can't remember if this was on the air or not, but, like, my wife's her line of work is because her second roommate in college did that, and, like, things just sort of happen, and I think, you know, if the people around you are all in STEM fields, and you're like, oh, that does look like fun. Like, that's a perfectly natural way for things to go. And if you want to have a career where, like, you have more of an impact or something, I think that's also a perfectly natural inclination that a lot of people have.
I went into art because I didn't think I was smart enough. And, like, basically I was told growing up, you know, like, you're a girl, like, rockets are for boys.
Art takes a lot of smarts.
I mean, I took optics for artists and talked about that shit. But the thing is that it's just, like, the stereotypes and the people I was around.
Yeah, you had bad influences growing up, and I'm glad you've basically given them all the finger. And,
sounds like your norms were more toxic before.
But yeah, maybe I
like if people were telling you that girls can't do rockets, that's bullshit.
I guess I'm trying to think of, like,
getting into rationality was what, like, convinced me that I could go into a STEM field and be successful. Like, I used to actually, like, have this deeply internalized, I'm an art person, I'm bad at math, you know, like, I'm already good at this, and I've sunk all this, like, time and energy into training it, so I should just do that. But also, like, I like video games, and I like art and writing, and I'm intrinsically motivated by those, too, and I think they're useful, and so maybe, I don't know, my real suspicion is just that I get really bored, and I change careers every 2 or 3 years. It's ADD, that's all.
Did I also say that one of the caveats was these norms weren't toxic for everyone?
No, you didn't mention that one, but yeah.
The other caveat he lays out is that these norms aren't toxic for everyone. There are people who, in fact, are happiest when they're entirely or almost entirely devoted to the fancy intellectual principles of a specialized group. Which reminded me of Ayla's Otters vs. Possums post from, I don't even know how long ago it was, but it was a while ago now. Where she draws this distinction between possum people and otter people, where possums are people who like a specific culture, and just being a welcoming community is insufficient to give them a sense of belonging. They need some specific culture and with some sort of goals and norms, whereas otters are people who like most cultures. They can find a way to get along with anybody and don't have specific standards, and they're widely tolerant. And because of this, communities tend to acquire otters faster than possums. Because, you know, otters will go anywhere, but possums are really selective, so otters will overtake it. Gradually, the community grows dilute as otters start entering who don't share the possum goals, even a little bit, or even start inviting possum friends with rival goals, like people who actively dislike rational practices being invited into rationalist servers. Possums then realize the community culture is not what it used to be and not what they want, so they try to moderate.
Or they leave.
Or they leave,
which is upsetting.
Yeah, either and both can happen. otters like each other, and so kicking an otter out makes the other otters really unhappy. And, it's a difference with how people are. In Otterland, everyone is welcome no matter who they are, and it takes a serious offense to get rejected. But in Possumland, just not sharing the core culture is all it really takes to get kicked out, because, that's what the area's about, and it's not considered a grievous offense if you're kicked out. And it even says Ayla says that they think the people they kick out are great, and would love to interact with them in every context outside of Possumland. And I don't know, this kind of seems like it might be related. Maybe Sasha's talking to a lot of people who got into the rationalist community by kind of sort of being a fit, but not quite, and then finding these conflicts and problems that made them unhappy, while the people who are really very well served by it are a minority and are like, why are you trying to change everything that makes us happy and makes this community what it is?
I think that's really relevant, actually. Our local rationalist group is composed of some people who just, found rationality on their own, but then there's the people that just listened to the podcast, the Methods of Rationality podcast, and show up to talk about, video games and movies, and are the kind of people who, I would say they're rational people, but they're not, some of them haven't read the sequences. Some of them are friends or significant others of people that come to the group and just come there for the community. And
actually, I think the majority of people in our Less Wrong group now have not read the sequences. Maybe not more than a handful of posts.
I don't really know how I feel about that. On one hand, I'm kind of, again, it's hard to draw a fine line between the positive and the toxic norms. Some of them are just norms, but, I sort of like the idea of, or I'm like...
If you say the map is not the territory, they'll know what you're talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay, I can bring that around to something. Charlie and I are talking about, Charlie dislikes it when people use rationalist jargon without explaining what they're talking about. And the fact that, our Less Wrong group is a, social hangout group, because Charlie says they wanted there to be, a group of people teaching and practicing rationalist techniques, I guess. And I kind of came back with, I want that to be a thing too, but also I don't want to ban rationalist terminology in case it scares away new people, because it's if you say something's a Moloch and then someone else understands what that means, you don't have to read an essay that's a novella length. And that's valuable, and that's sort of the reason that jargon exists is that you're shortening a big concept to a phrase, and then you can talk about big concepts easily. And then, there's some in-group signaling stuff.
Which is also valuable if you want to have a group that you're in with.
I think I am worried about the whole idea of otters coming in and just diluting a culture, but I also am uncomfortable with, banning people who haven't read the sequences from coming to Less Wrong meetups.
We haven't banned anybody for that anyway, and I think that's good, and I think lots of times people will just... we got a lot of people that only show up one time. They're people who found us at meetup.com and oh, rationalist, that sounds like an interesting thing. I wonder what that is. And they come and they're okay, these people are talking about a bunch of jargon I don't understand, and I don't really want to read all these posts, and they don't come back, and that's okay. We haven't banned anyone. They just didn't fit with the culture, and that's fine.
Yeah, luckily we haven't had to ban anyone. We have very low drama in our group.
Thank the stars.
I think a lot of... I know that there's more drama in the Bay, but...
Just in general.
Other, I don't know, Philly, New York, rationalist communities that I've seen, people that I've met from other communities, it seems like there's actually sort of a norm in rationalist spheres of being low drama, which is cool.
We ain't got no time for that shit, unless we're living in San Francisco, in which case, that's all you got time for, it sounds like. But I could be wrong. That is just what I get from half the country away.
Maybe, I can't think of a way to torture the analogy into this, but I don't really have a problem with, otters showing up if they hear about it and they're curious, and, if they have fun, they can put on their possum hats and hang out with us, or they can, say this isn't my cup of tea and leave. That's fine by me. I recently became aware that apparently Discord lets you search for Discords that find your interest or something.
I think you have to make them a community Discord first.
Yeah.
And we have not opted into that.
That's the thing, is that the size for that was apparently lowered to 1,000, of which the Bayesian Conspiracy Discord fits that. We could make ourselves a community findable thing.
Yeah.
And I my immediate inclination is, no, I'm good.
No, yeah.
Like, I like the filter bubble that you have to be at least X nerdy to find this.
Yes.
And then that way, we're not going to just be, there won't be like
Flooded with randos.
Well, and then,
Or like people who are deliberately looking for those fucking rationalists so they can go yell at them.
well, they could find us maybe without that much effort if they're really motivated. But the other thing is just like, I want to have like hey, welcome to the thing. Here's the,
Here's the community guidelines.
And like the
Sign this waiver.
the Lord of the Rings trilogy long list of things that you should read to be able to follow conversations here. Like, not just, I don't have an impulse for our little corner of the community to grow. My desire for that doesn't outweigh my desire to not have to work to make the community do stuff. So I'm fine with it at the level that it's at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of, I think, where I'm at when I was saying, like, I'm a little concerned about the idea of, like, the community getting diluted to the point where it disappears, and then also, but I wouldn't want to ban people who haven't read the sequences, and I think it's kind of a self-policing problem in that way.
Yeah. So I guess, one last thing to pull out of the essay as a whole, and then kind of the summary bit at the end, if we have time and energy for that.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the thing that I wanted to pull out that struck me as very interesting was he has an aside where he says basically everything he's been talking about here about toxic norms and people not fitting. He says, this is what post-rationalists are. It's not that complicated. They don't have explicit principles because they've moved on from thinking that life is entirely about explicit principles, with that last part in italics. And
wasn't that directed at Eliezer Yudkowsky? Also, he's
it
like,
was.
Listen, Yudkowsky.
Yes, it was. I wasn't sure we needed direct call-outs to start flame wars, but yeah, he did drop that
funny.
name. Okay. And
I didn't know the
take it
background
as-
context for that. Did Yudkowsky tweet out, like, what are post-rationalists, ? Like,
no, but I mean, for a while, there's just been like a general confusion in his mind about what the fuck is going on with these post-rationalists, which I kind of mirror as well.
Yeah, like the fact that there's a bunch of wizards here now, and there was somebody in the Bay that was teaching a class on chakras.
Oh my god. Not a rationalist.
No, in the rationalist community.
Oh
but they
my
were trying
God.
to use a framework to say that, like, well, it's a useful metaphor for, and that was where I like started being like,
well, it's not this person's fault. It's the other people's fault for going to their class. But, like, from what I can tell, sorry, let's go ahead and just say what post-rationalists are, because honestly, I think he's describing Julia Galef. I mean, it's not that she doesn't have principles, but it's like, okay,
Well, I
she
think
she doesn't have these toxic values.
Yeah, I think he's
or these
building
toxic
an
norms.
explicit straw man when he says that, because, yeah, he says that post-rationalists moved on from thinking that life is entirely about explicit principles. And, I mean, my two comments are, first of all, I think explicit principles are super important, and everyone should have some, but I agree that thinking all life is entirely about explicit principles is dumb, and people shouldn't think that, but anyone who does think that, and thinks that's what rationally is also dumb and wrong. Like, rationality is not about saying life is entirely about explicit principles. That is, I mean, he's just created like a straw Burning Man Vulcan.
If someone wanted to be uncharitable to Sasha, to this post, we could say, Sasha's an example of what someone looks like when they've moved on from like the norms of like engaging with your audience directly and not being not erecting straw men, right?
I mean, and
I've moved on from thinking that straw men are bad. Like, I'm throwing shade on purpose. I think this is a well written post, and I think Sasha's smart. But I'm saying, like,
this
to
one
say,
particular line.
well, they've moved on from thinking that life is. Well, first of all, they've moved on from make it sound like they've transcended this obviously wrong thing, right?
Which is
And so-
what rationalists actually believe. I'm like, fuck you.
So, but then the other thing is like that life
In a
is
polite way.
entirely about explicit principles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone who says that or who thinks that, and I've read more than the average person's read of philosophy. Like, you have to get really into the esoteric before someone says something that stupid. Yeah. And so it sucks because the rest of this is well written, and I just don't know quite where.
Why was this in here?
This one line.
It's a bit
like it.
off-putting.
I wish it had more.
Because everything else is good.
I wish there was more support or explanation behind this, because it's like, this is what post-rationalists are, and then gives some insane thing that no one ever thought, and it's like, oh, okay, so literally everybody.
EY replied
Like
to...
Yudkowsky's. Oh, did he reply to this?
He replied to this in a tweet. He said, I used to be a cyberpunk, but then I realized big corporate profits weren't always good for the little people. Now I'm a post-cyberpunk. Which anyone familiar with cyberpunk is laughing right now. And he says, yeah, I have a similar story. One day I realized human beings were often pretty bad at explicit reasoning, and now I'm a post-rationalist. I love the analogy because it's perfect.
And I didn't know, I wasn't aware of those responses, and it sucks because they're perfectly appropriate to that, how bad that line is.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if he had said, look, here's what post-rationalists are, because I think I could think of an example that doesn't suck, and I don't know I'm not familiar with the term, maybe it's a thing that's out there, and maybe they've got their own subreddit, I don't know, but like, it could be, I used to be super into rationality, I used to be like the person who not just read all the sequences, but read all the other posts, found the other blogs. I spent a minimum of 4 hours a day reading this stuff and, whatever. And now I'm down to a couple hours a week. Like, that sound, like, I got crazy into it, read all the things, and now I've let it take a backseat and I'm having fun with other stuff too.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like a reasonable
your
definition.
Identity.
Yeah, I've expanded my identity. You
grew up.
Yeah, I like the, what was that?
I like the, Sasha even put it as, maybe this is just growing up. Because I was like, yeah, you grew up. That's what happens when you have your first community and you identify with it. And then, like, it becomes all social justice mongering. And then you, like, now I'm a post-Steven Universe fan. It's just like, no, you just figured out that, like, this one community isn't the, like, be-all, end-all of your life. You're a human with other, you can have hobbies and
I think that's common
like
for people who
stuff.
get into a lot of things, whether it's like bowling or you mentioned woodworking. Like, you do this and then you're like, oh, this is great, and you're going 3-4 nights a week, and then you do that for a couple of years and you're like, okay, I've had about as much fun bowling as I can. I'll still go when my friends ask me, but like, I guess
you're just not obsessed with it.
Yeah,
but bowling isn't a way of life and a framework by which one ought to orient their life structure and goals, right? So
thing is, I was very much into new atheism, and like all that has passed now. I'm still an atheist. I believe in the stuff, but like I don't call myself a post new atheist, and I don't have beef with the current atheists. I think the post rationalist is someone who actually has beef with current rationalism or what they think of current rationalism, and I'm not sure.
Then I missed the mark when I guessed. Like I said, I think your analogy to post-new atheist is perfect. Yeah. Like I was also super into that stuff. I don't remember the last time I read an anti-religious post about anything, right? Yeah. Maybe I'd still have fun with it, but it's those are a great few years. I'm really glad I was, that this all happened.
I haven't disavowed anything either.
No.
From like being part of the skeptic atheist community. It's not like I was like, oh, okay, I'm done with that. Now I'm gonna, go buy a Ouija board and look for Bigfoot.
Yeah, we had our fun.
That's
with
still part of my identity. It's just not like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I liked most of this post just fine. It was just because I felt like it was applicable. Keep your eyes open for these failure modes. This just felt bizarrely out of place. I'm glad that you pulled it out with the replies here because I didn't know that Yudkowsky had responded to this.
Yeah, I think I found parts of this off-putting because it seemed like it's something that people are already talking about or that's already been talked about, that's kind of been answered. The whole, like, worrying that EAs are going to burn out, like, is definitely something people talk about all the time. And but I still think it's good to sort of have this collated article here that does also answer itself. Yeah. Like, it says, like, these are toxic norms, they're things that happen in it. Every community, here's what to, expect. And like I said, I'm glad that this exists. I would like for this to be like one of, if a new person's just coming to Less Wrong for the first time, for this to be like one of the things that they see earlier on. Mm-hmm. So they might realize that it's not the best idea to just like, throw out all of your sci-fi fantasy and be like, I'm just a rationalist now. Throw out all of my woodworking tools. All I'm going to do is learn math and study AI theory.
Wes had a great comment about that. I do not recognize these rationalists that the post-rationalists talk about, but I always assume that's because I don't live near San Francisco.
Yeah, things are weird there.
Yeah. So he ends with, I think, a bit of a call to action, which I really like. So I'm basically just going to read. This isn't the whole thing. I cut out a few snippets, but this is the the thing, and it's a little bit longer. So, if you're big in the EA scene, a young, freshly minted EA can't stop talking about how excited they are to do good, and how inspired they are by your virtuousness. There's maybe no obvious sign that they've started rejecting every part of themselves that is not congruent to this new identity. So, if you're reading this and you're part of a weird subculture, and you notice that your adherence to it makes you dissociate from significant parts of yourself, try consciously allowing those seemingly incongruous parts to coexist. For the rest of us, look for signs of weariness and self-hatred among your peers. Be curious about whether some of their human requirements are not being met by the local milieu. And if your relationship with them is sufficiently close, help them see that those needs are reasonable, and that they can be met in all sorts of ways that have nothing to do with the prevailing local fashion. You have needs and wants that are probably not addressed by the fixations of this group. Don't think this thing has to be all of you. I think that's fantastic advice for any group, and since we are a group, that's good advice for us too.
Yeah, see, that's it's...
This is the thing that I wish that they had at anime cons instead of cosplays not consent.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because again, this is applicable to, like, if this is your first, or even, like, I don't know, your 10th community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's applicable
to that.
It's applicable to everything. I mean, if you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and you're like, your job is fixing people and, you know, being aware of all the stuff that, like, is addressing people's needs and all that. And it's like, yeah, it turns out that, like, your community of of peers might not be enough to, like, actually do all that for you too, right? Like, so that, I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, addressing people's needs and wants can be, like, your explicit group's goal, and you might still, like, it would still not be sufficient for every participant in that group. Yeah, I mean, that's gold. I like this. That part's great. It's just funny because, like you mentioned with the EA, like, that seeming out of date, you know, I guess I wanted to clarify because I mentioned the 1975 essay that may or may not have mostly kicked this stuff off, but you can't come across EA now and not have it be fully caveated with, like, don't make this your whole life. I mean, at least I can't. Mm-hmm. You know, you find Will McCaskill or, you know, who's another one I was just listening to?
That's a big thing in Burning Man circles, too. One of the things they tell people is, yeah, this is awesome. Don't let this become your whole life, because that's an issue. Yeah,
Toby Ord is another major figure. He, I think, did he start or just help co-found the Giving What You Can pledge? Like, so this guy is huge, right? Mm-hmm. This is a pledge that people have given, I think, over $100 million and pledged 10 times that. The goal of that isn't sell your house, you know,
live in a box.
Yeah. It's like, no, give like 10%.
What you can.
Yeah. And, you know, some people can afford to give more. Some people can afford to give less. That's totally fine. You know, if you can give $50 a month, cool. And if you can't, no one's going to give you shit about it. Like, that's modern day EA. And I feel like that's been modern day EA for 10 years. But I might be out of the loop. Again, if Sasha's also in California, I'm just going to completely willing to acknowledge that might be an entirely different planet.
Right.
And so, maybe things are just as crazy over there as they ever have been. You know, Will McCaskill and Toby are both, I think, with Oxford. So maybe England is more chill about EA than again, Julia Gay lives in California, and she's sane about her effective altruism.
There's pockets, there's, like, some stratification of the rationalist community in the Bay, where there's the, you know, big people in the community and they're in group, and then there's, like, the side groups of people, because, like, if you got into the rationalist community and you're looking to connect with other rationalists, like, people go to the Bay. That's, like, that's the meeting spot. Mm-hmm. It's the mecca. I know, like, several people who moved from other countries to the Bay Area and then either stayed there or moved somewhere else, but they moved for the rationalist community and found, like, community networking and jobs through that. So us, like, busting on the Bay, I think that this is, yeah, like, way more of an issue there, but, like, it has these sort of other, like, confounding, I don't know, qualities that make it uniquely, I think, weird.
and uniquely awesome. I appreciate you.
And awesome.
I appreciate you pointing that out, because you're right. I think I do very little other than bash on it, and it is out of love. I hope but since I exclusively give it a hard time, it's easy to lose sight of that.
We don't want to start a East Coast West Coast rap battle kind of feud.
I mean, I think that could be productive, and we've got David on the East Coast, so I think we'd be good.
I have to say, I love the Bay. Like, I make fun of it too.
We've got 2 Davids on the East Coast to help us with that rap battle. Sorry.
Oh man.
I mean, we'd be the Mountain Coast, so
Yeah.
it's a tri-coastal
The Mountain
fight.
Coast.
But you mentioned that, like you said, people came over because they found the community online. They found they were networked into awesome careers and new lives. That's fantastic.
And they have the Reach, which I think still exists, where there's actually a hub. And I thought that was really cool. And I considered moving to the Bay when I was comparing places to leave New Jersey for. I ended up picking Denver, but I could see myself being happy there too.
When you're just like, I can barely afford to live there, and I can't afford to live there, so Denver it is.
I think we're done then, yes? Was there things that people wanted to add?
Almost, sir. You know who doesn't have toxic social norms?
Who? Please do tell.
Michael Cahoon. Ta-da, noise.
And what?
Yeah.
Why isn't sure?
Oh, because they supported this episode via our Patreon.
That seems like a very positive social norm.
That is.
We should make that a norm of the community.
Yeah.
To support this podcast through the Patreon. Thank you, Michael Cahoon. You have helped us bring this to you. Hopefully this helps make the community better, and hopefully it makes you happy as well that you helped us, because it certainly makes us happy.
Yeah, you totally rock. And this is a reminder to everybody in general, and especially people who support the podcast. Our reward tiers are nothing to brag about, so don't look at those. Just if there's anything we can do, let us know, and if it's within reason, we'll make it happen.
Alrighty, that's it for us. We will see everybody here in 2 weeks, and thanks for joining us.
Sounds like fun.
Bye everybody.